Welcome to AynRandCon Live. I'm Elan Journo, Director and Senior Fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute. You might know we had planned to hold an in-person conference in Philadelphia today, but sadly we had to cancel that in view of the coronavirus pandemic. But this is the good news. We're here online. We're glad to have you. We're live streaming right now on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, and Periscope. Thank you all for joining us today. In just a moment, we'll start with our keynote address from my colleague Onkar Ghate. First, a word about the format for today, and I hope you can see on screen the program that we have planned. We have 3 talks and a general Q&A following that. And as we do in our in-person conferences, we've been doing these AynRandCon events around the country and around the world. One of the guiding goals is to make it really interactive. We want you to ask questions. We want you to explore. We want you to challenge. We want you to think about these ideas. And so we're inviting you to ask questions. You can ask your questions on Zoom. You can ask them on YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, wherever you're watching, you can submit questions. I have 2 colleagues helping us out, trying to gather all the questions in. And we've allotted time after each talk to have a question period so that you guys can submit your questions. And if we don't get to all the questions, we're going to spill them over into the general Q&A. So really want you to be engaged and ask questions. And you can see from the program, we hope you can stay for everything. There'll be some breaks for you to dip out and grab some coffee, take a break. But we hope you can enjoy as much of the event as you can. Drop in to the extent you have the time today. Thank you for sharing your weekend with us. Now, for our theme today, the title and theme of this conference is Reason, Purpose, Self-Esteem, Keys to a Better Life and Society. And to develop that theme and get us started, I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Onkar Ghate. Onkar is the Senior Fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute. He is the Chief Philosophy Officer at the Ayn Rand Institute. He's also a member of the Board of Directors of the Ayn Rand Institute. He's our resident expert on Ayn Rand's philosophy. Onkar, welcome.
Hi, Elan. Thanks.
Let me hand over the session to you, and I'll be back for the Q&A in a little while. Thanks.
Okay, sounds good. I'll now share my screen now. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on a Saturday, and sorry we couldn't do this live, but as you know, I think everyone knows the reason, and I'm sure some of you are cooped up at home trying to practice social distancing and at least slow down the spread of the virus. So I hope this is something interesting to do as you're cooped up at home. So my goal, as Elan said, I'm doing the keynote, and at the conference, this was the first talk. And the goal here is I want to give you a bit of an overview of Ayn Rand's philosophy, but particularly focused on, so one way she often described what her philosophy is about, what her worldview is about the issues of reason, purpose, and self-esteem. And this is an interesting and useful angle by which to sort of look at her whole worldview. And in particular, what I'm going to stress for these 3 issues, reason, purpose, self-esteem, is that she thinks of them as crucial moral issues. They're keys to forming your character, sort of forming your character properly, to having a moral character. And they're keys to living a successful, happy life. And really what we're going to be talking about in these 3 talks is some of what is distinctive and very challenging about Ayn Rand's worldview, but looking at it from the perspective of what she says about good and evil, what she says about morality. And it is challenging, but I think that's part of what makes it really interesting. She has a lot of ideas no one has ever said before in regard to ethics, and she's challenging us to rethink many things. So she has a perspective of that most of us are like this guy, particularly in regard to the fundamental moral issues in life. We don't think enough about them. We don't question them. We don't probe. And rather what we do is we take what's given to us. What people say is good, what people say is evil. Whether it's your teachers at school, religious preachers at church, elderly people around you. It's basically what everybody says about good and evil. That's what most of us take as, yeah, that's the way we should think. And in that sense, we're programmed by other people, by the views that are dominant or in the culture and in the intellectual world, in the educational world. And we don't think enough about, yeah, but is it true or not? Is this the correct approach or not? And part of what philosophy is about really consciously delving into those issues and thinking about them. And what Rand's philosophy in particular, which she called objectivism, what her philosophy is about is really challenging a lot of conventional wisdom and received opinion. So, and the goal of a philosophy in general, I think, but of objectivism in particular, it's about empowerment. So it's about not being like this, but rather being a self-programmer, that what recedes into the background is just you accept what happens to be what your culture views as good and evil, and this is what you should do in life, and this is what it means to live a proper life. And to be a self-programmer, the first step is to really think these issues through, and often rethinking the issues, and then trying to live what you've come to think, yeah, this is the proper approach, this is correct, then to live it. But the first thing you need to do is to think about it. And these issues of reason, purpose, self-esteem in Rand's philosophy, they're interconnected. And I think as I go through this I mean, I can't go into any great detail, but a little bit of detail, you'll see that these issues are interconnected. And particularly when we're thinking about issues of good and evil, of what's right and wrong, of morality, these issues are interconnected. And I want to start, so it's reason, purpose, self-esteem. We're going to go in the reverse order. I want to talk a little bit about self-esteem, a little bit about purpose, and then a little bit about reason. So self-esteem, and of these three things, I think self-esteem under the title, so reason, purpose, self-esteem. Self-esteem is probably the most talked about, that it's you should strive for self-esteem. There's something important about having self-esteem, and there's something lacking if you don't have self-esteem. And I think that if you boil it down, self-esteem comes down to two issues, or there's two questions. So self-esteem means an esteem, an evaluation, a judgment of yourself. And I think there's two fundamental questions that self-esteem is focused on. Am I able to do things in life? And it's an issue of, do I have self-confidence or self-doubt? Do I think I'm capable? Do I have the ability to do it, or do I not? And self-confidence obviously is a positive answer to that question, or the result of, yes, thinking I'm able. Then you have confidence in yourself, that you'll be able to figure things out to achieve your goals. Am I able, and am I good? So this is really the issue. You can think of it as pride or guilt, of self-respect or a self-loathing. Am I good? So this is, should I view myself as I'm entitled to moral self-respect? And Rand thinks this is a crucial issue in life, of whether you have self-esteem or not, of whether you have a positive answer to, am I able? Yes, I'm able. I can think, I can figure things out, I can achieve goals in life. And am I good? Do I warrant self-respect? Should I feel pride, or should I feel guilt in life? And I want to focus, but as I said, I want to in sort of delimiting a little bit and narrowing because there's a lot that we could talk about in regard to reason, purpose, self-esteem. The focus here, both for me and in what Elan and then Yaron will be talking about, are issues about morality. So I want to focus particularly on this second question. Am I good? Should I feel pride in myself, a profound moral self-respect, or not? And the answer that we get most often is no, particularly when we're talking in a moral sense. Pride is regarded as a sin. The normal view of pride, it's a sin, or it's sometimes one of the 7 worst sins. But there's something wrong. You're not entitled to respect yourself morally, to think that you're good, to think that you've lived up to what you should be doing in life. And I want to give one concrete example under this. You may have heard of Peter Singer. He's one of the most famous living philosophers, I think. There's not that many today who are well known. He's one of the better known of philosophers today. This is probably his most famous. It started off as an essay. Now it's a book. It's a short book, but it's put in book form: Famine, Affluence, and Morality. And I don't know if you can read this from on the screen, but there's a foreword by Bill and Melinda Gates to when it was put into book form. And there's a few essays in this book of about 100 pages. And the basic point in the book is to take our conventional view of morality that says morality is not about you. It's not about yourself. It's not about your interests. It's not about your happiness. Morality, if you're thinking, am I good? And then deserving of moral self-respect. Morality is about other people and giving up your interests, your values, your money for other people. And the book is everybody agrees with this. This is the kind of, in a nutshell, the argument in the book. Everybody agrees with this. But if you agree with it and take it seriously, it leads, and I'll quote from the book, it leads to the uncomfortable conclusion that very few of us are living fully ethical lives. Close quote. So if what morality is about is not about you, it's about giving up your interests, your values for the sake of other people. It's putting other people first. If that's what morality is about, then if you ask the question, if you're deserving of real moral self-respect, am I doing what's good? It really comes down to, have I sacrificed enough? And as I say, this is a book that Bill and Melinda Gates write a favorable foreword to, and that this is one of the things that had an influence on them. If Bill Gates leaving Microsoft and turning to charity and turning to his foundation, and the news is just now he's even resigning now from the board of Microsoft, I think effective Friday. But part of the argument in the book brings in Gates and asks, has Gates done enough? Has he sacrificed enough? He's given away 30 billion. Yes, that's true. But he's still, and these are actual examples, but he still lives atop, so he's still near the top of the Forbes richest list of Americans. He lives in a 66,000 square foot estate near Seattle that's supposedly worth 100 million or something like that. He has things in his possession like the only handwritten book by Leonardo da Vinci still in private hands, which in 1994 he paid 30-some million for. And then it's the question asked in the book, again quoting, has Bill Gates done enough? And the answer is no, he hasn't done enough. And it's now, many people might not be in a position to say, have you given this proportion of your total wealth away in the way that Gates has? So you might not be in a position to criticize him and to say, well, no, you still have not done enough. Don't think that you're good. Don't exhibit pride in what you're doing. Don't think you're deserving of moral self-respect. Because there's people, and again, actual example and part of the argument in the book, there's people like Zell Kravinsky, who's given away way more of his money. He had something like 45 million. And he says, well, the hardest thing is not giving away the first million or the 10th million. It's giving away the last 10,000. When you have to live so cheaply that you can't even function in the business world. And he goes beyond just giving away his money. He gave away, he thought about it and said, well, look, there's all kinds of people who need all kinds of things, not just money. So he contacted a hospital in Philadelphia and donated his money, his kidney, sorry, not his money. He donated his kidney to complete strangers. And that's, if you're asked, like, are you good? Have you sacrificed enough? That's the motto. And this, as I say, the book the whole argument is like everybody accepts that that is what is good. What we're taught, we're all taught that the evil is the self and the good is to sacrifice the self, to sacrifice your interests, to sacrifice your values, to sacrifice your millions or thousands of dollars, and to sacrifice your kidney for the sake of others. And in terms of thinking about the issue of purpose, and it has a connection to self-esteem. The issue of purpose is, what is your fundamental goals in life? And what morality tells us is that we should think of the self as evil, and the good is to engage in self-sacrifice. So that you shouldn't even do it like Bill Gates isn't deserving of self-esteem, particularly on the question, am I good? He's not deserving of moral self-respect because he hasn't given away nearly enough of what he should be giving away. If it really is about sacrifice, he's done some, but not enough. And if you're to reclaim and to achieve genuine self-respect, then you have to question this whole view, the whole view that tells you that the self and striving for the self and striving for its own interest, that's evil, and the good is to give up. So part of what Rand's whole worldview is about, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about in the next 2.5 hours, is the issue of you have to rethink good and evil. You have to rethink moral issues. You have to rethink what is viewed conventionally as right and conventionally as wrong. That what Rand argues and what her worldview and her philosophy, objectivism, maintains is that what we're taught is radically mistaken, and that we need to rethink it. And you need to have the sort of the intellectual courage to be willing to challenge what everybody says is, yeah, this is what's right and this is what's wrong. You have to be willing to say, no, maybe that's all mistaken and we need to rethink. If you're willing to take that step, you're going to be almost for sure met with either in your own mind thinking this, or other people will tell you this, which is, so you're just going to rethink good and evil. You're going to rethink morality. Well, what does it have to do with thinking? This is morality. And you say you're going to bring reason, thought, evidence, careful consideration into it. That's not what morality is about. Morality, and I'm sure you've heard this exactly, or variations of this. Morality is about the heart, not the head. It's about feelings, not logic. It's about faith, not reason. It's thinking is not what you need if you're going to live a moral life. What you need is to feel. And what you need to feel is what everybody tells you is what your moral feelings should be. And so this is the common view, and you should notice that what it makes impossible is a real challenge to the conventional view of what is presented, that the evil is the self, your interests, your values, your concerns, your happiness, and what the good consistent is giving that up for the sake of others. If you can't think about that, you're never going to be able to challenge it in any fundamental sense. So one of the crucial things that Rand is insisting on is that you can think about morality, that you should not think that morality and reason, or morality and facts, or morality and logic are in two different compartments, and you can't bring one to bear on the other. So, and this is what we're going to now be talking about. I'm going to say a little bit about it, but Elan will be delving more into this, and so will Yaron, of what it looks like to rethink issues about good and evil in a fundamental sense. And I want to start with what it is that one is, to look, where does the conventional view come from? And I think in a nutshell, it comes from centuries of the Judeo-Christian perspective on morality. and it comes from religions more broadly, but if we're talking here in, we're in the United States, and if you're talking more broadly in the Western world, the religion that dominates is the Judeo-Christian perspective. And you get sort of two basic perspectives. One is that you're commanded to serve God, or you think of that you were handed 10 commandments. And this is what we have to follow. This is what we have to obey. And it's not an issue of thinking the commandments. It's not detailed arguments for this is why you should do it. So these are your orders. These are your marching orders. You should follow and you should obey. And the good is to follow, to obey, to not think about it, to not question it, to not ask for arguments or reasons. So this is one dominant approach, that it's what it is. You're commanded to serve God. And then essential to the commandments, or you're commanded to serve others. And this is what I was stressing at the outset. And I was saying, like Peter Singer's book, this is what he stresses. You're commanded to serve others. Everybody knows that the good is to serve others. And I have up, if you can see it on the screen, a picture of Paul Ryan, who's considered on the right in terms of politics, and Obama on the left. So they're considered sort of two poles, at least in American politics, two poles. And these are pictures of them both working in soup kitchens when they're on the political trail and political campaigning. And why? Why do they pose like this? Why do they want photographs of themselves like this? Precisely because this is an act of sacrifice. I'm not benefiting from this. I don't want to scrub pots and dishes for hours on end. But if I'm going to give up my interests, if I'm going to sacrifice and show that I place other people above self, then this is what I do. So this is moral. This is to show that they're moral. This is what they do. And this is, it's one of many, many examples you could use of how this really is the conventional view that almost everybody accepts. No one is going to object to, why are you doing this? Why do you think this is moral? Of course it's moral. And it goes in the religious teachings. It goes so far, it's not just about other people or about strangers. It's even love your enemies. Do good to them which hate you. And so you can find this in Luke, you can find this in Matthew, in both of these in the New Testament. It's when you place others above self, it's any others, including people who hate you, despise you, your enemies. And you're going to live a moral life. And if you're going to view yourself as, I'm entitled to think that I'm good, this is what you have to do. And this is, so one of the reasons this saturates our culture is that religion has been the place for centuries where people got their moral teaching. Now, if you compare, say, the Middle Ages to today, religion has less of an influence, but this view, I think, is still dominant. And if you ask why, I think the basic answer is it's been secularized. So these are the two, from sort of the 20th, 21st century perspective, these are the two leading moralists in the 19th century. And if you take classes in ethics, if you're an engineer or a lawyer, I had both friends in both of these fields when I was in school. And most of the time, you're assigned a course on ethics. You're to learn your profession's ethics and to learn to think ethically, and you have to behave morally as an engineer, as a lawyer, and so. And what do you learn? And when you look at the textbooks, you're offered two different approaches: the Kant's approach to morality and John Stuart Mill's approach to morality. One is about duty. The other is about utilitarianism, the greatest happiness of the greatest number, if you've heard that formulation. And I think the proper way to think of these two is they're secularized versions of these two things. So you're commanded to serve God, or you're commanded to serve others. So what Kant stresses is commandments. Now, he doesn't say, well, you don't have to think of them as commandments from God, but they're commandments from some other realm. They're duties. One of the technical terms, he called them categorical imperatives. They're orders that you have to follow. And what morality is about is doing your duty simply because it's your duty. It's to follow, to obey, to not think about it, to not ask too many questions, to not ask for reasons and evidence. It's to obey. So he stresses that first aspect of it, obedience to duty. And so that's the first of these. And John Stuart Mill stresses the second. It's about service to others. It's not about yourself. It's not about thinking of your own happiness. It's about thinking of everybody else's happiness, the greatest happiness of the greatest number, and acting towards that. And even so, to take the issue of, does it include strangers, enemies? Yes. You're not to make any distinctions about whose happiness it is. Do they are deserving of it? Do they even like you? Are they enemy? Are they plotting against you? It's the greatest happiness of the greatest number. If you're moral, that's what you consider. So though it's true that we don't live in nearly as religious a period if you took, say, the 15th or 14th century, the religious approach to ethics is with us because what happened is it was simply secularized. There's not an overt appeal that it comes from the Bible or the New Testament, but it just takes over that view that what life and morality is about those things, and says and gives it a more secular spin. But it's the same essential view. And this, I think, is the basic reasons, the fundamental reason why this view endures and is viewed as unquestionable. It's the conventional wisdom that you have to be evil if you're going to challenge. But Ayn Rand says if you're going to become a real self-programmer, if you're not just going to take over what is offered to you and you're told, well, you have to accept this, and if you don't, well, that shows that you're standing outside of morality, you're evil, you're doing something really wrong. If you're going to become a self-programmer, you have to be willing to challenge this whole approach and to ask the question, where do good and bad or good and evil actually come from? And they don't, if you're seeking a rational, scientific, logic-based, evidence-based approach, you're not going to accept, well, look, it's in some holy book written 2,000 years ago, it comes from the supernatural. And you shouldn't accept that view when it's secularized, because it's the same essential view, just secularized. So it would be like if you think of places where the religious view was more challenged. When Darwin's challenging, no, the whole view of life that we get in the Bible is wrong. It has a long history. There's evolution. It's not God implants human beings on the earth, and that's the end of the story. It has a long history, a long development. It's what happened was not, okay, we have to approach this rationally, scientifically, looking for evidence, and then we'll just give the same story that's in the Bible. The earth's created in 7 days, and woman is made from the rib of Adam, and so but we'll give it a secular spin. No, it's that the whole approach and the whole content was wrong. And that is what Rand thinks in regard to morality, that it's essentially of what dominates today is coming from religion. And it's not a solution just to secularize that view. You have to ask, where does it really come from? That if we're tossing out completely this appeal to the supernatural and to God, we have to rethink it from its foundations. So let me say now a few words about what she's arguing of where good and bad actually come from. So this is a picture of the moon. And the answer is not they come from the moon. But I'm putting this picture up for a definite purpose. It's on the moon, there's no distinction between good and bad, good and evil, what's right and wrong, what's valuable or harmful. This whole perspective and this distinction, you wouldn't need it looking at the moon. There's nothing to categorize on the moon in terms of good and bad, right and wrong, and so on. But that's not true when you look at the Earth. When you look at the Earth, you need the distinction between good and bad, right and wrong, what's valuable and what's harmful. And you need that distinction. And because the Earth, unlike the moon, the Earth is teeming with life. So here is a sort of a collage of some of the life, and this barely scratches the surface of what exists on the Earth. It's all kinds of different living things. And when you have the existence of living things, you need a perspective of what's good for them and what's bad for them. I've got up, if you can see, some ladybugs and a spider. If the ladybugs get caught in the spider's web, is that good for them or bad for them? Is that valuable or is that harmful? And the answer readily comes. Well, it might be good for the spider that now he's got a meal. It's not good for the ladybugs who are caught in the web. This is going to likely mean, if they're not able to get out of it, and you see them frantically trying to get out of it when the bugs first get caught in the web. If they can't get out of it, they're somebody's dinner. It's bad for them. It's good for the spider. And you can take this for all these different living things. The forest fires in Australia. Is that good for the koalas or bad? Well, they don't know how to cope. They often can't flee or don't know they should flee. So it's bad, and you see hundreds and thousands of them dying. So the whole perspective of good and bad, of what's beneficial or harmful, what's valuable, of the fact that things need to seek goals. It's when we have living things, then we need a distinction between these are the things these particular living thing has to reach. The spider has to catch insects if it's to stay alive. That's what's good for it. And if it's unable to do that, if its web keeps getting knocked down, that's bad. I've got a whole forest here. The sunlight, that's something good. It's something needed. And the plants work to reach the sunlight. They grow up, they orient their leaves so they're getting sunlight. They're striving for what's valuable to them and trying to avoid, flee, escape what's harmful to them. So it's because of the fact of life that there's values, that there's good and bad, and in the end, right and wrong. Now, when we talk of it as right and wrong or good and evil, we're thinking particularly of living things that are able to make choices, to think about what they're doing and to decide, yeah, this is the right course of action. This is what I should be going after. This is what I should be pursuing because it's good for me. For other, like if you're taking the spider or the ladybugs, they act much more in a programmed way. That is, they can't be self-programming. It's programmed already for them of how they're going to act. Or if you think of the trees in the forest, it's programmed that their leaves will turn towards the sun, that they will grow upward, trying to get to the light. They don't have choice about it. They don't have to think about it. They don't have to figure out what to do. It's a given for them. But for human beings, and I have up here in the center, this is a picture of a city and people driving around, walking around. We're so much safer, better off. We thrive in a city in comparison to if you dump someone in the jungle when he has no resources, no equipment. So this is our kind of environment in which we live, in which we thrive. But it has to be created. It created over a long period of time. All kinds of things had to be figured out in terms, if you just, some of what's in this picture, automobiles, asphalt, electricity, traffic lights. This is massive amount of knowledge that it was acquired and then put into action. It's not given. So for human beings, unlike for these other living things, for all living things, there's things that are good and things that are bad. things that are valuable, things that are harmful. For human beings, we need to figure all of this out. It's not given to us. And what knowledge really is about is figuring out what is valuable and what isn't. And this is the whole, to think about morality, you have to get this whole context, that this is how Ayn Rand thinks about life, about where good and bad come from, for why we have a distinction between what's valuable and what's harmful. And then what morality in particular is about is, you can put it like this, that it's about the health of your soul. And this is a perspective which Ayn Rand shares with I think the Greek perspective on philosophy and morality. That is, this is a scene, this is a painting of Raphael's School of Athens. So these are many of the thinkers and philosophers in ancient Greece. At the center is Plato and Aristotle, who are the two most important philosophers in ancient Greece. And this is, I think, how both of them thought about the issue. So if you think of medicine as that's concerned with the health of your body, and there's so much to learn about proper nutrition, about the kind of exercise you need, about hydration, about what produces health. And there's medicine, there's the whole field of biology and human biology. There's a development of drugs. So there's a tremendous amount to learn about just the health of the body. And what morality focuses on is the health of your soul, or the health of your mind, about the fundamental ideas that you have in life and that are shaping how you look at the world and therefore how you act in it. And what you think of as, this is worth pursuing, this is a value that I should go after, and this is something, or on the contrary, this is something I should avoid. This is something that I should not bring into my life. What morality, you can call it the health of your soul. This does not mean that your soul in a supernatural dimension or something like that. It means you and your basic ideas, your basic values, your basic outlook on life. Another way you can put it is, it's your basic character, that you form who you are, and therefore what you're going to do in life, what you're going to strive for, what you're going to be able to realize and achieve. That this is what morality studies. So what the science of ethics is about, it's not anything like it's figure out your interests and give them up. It's all about sacrifice. It's about losing. It's about viewing yourself as evil. On the Rand's approach, and so how she's challenging the conventional moral viewpoint at its root, that is the opposite of the truth. What the science of ethics is about is figuring out what really is in your interest. So what it studies is how to become a person and have the character or have the soul that is capable of thriving in life. So what it studies is values, virtues, vices of the formation of a character, the principles and goals, the fundamental principles and goals you should adopt in life. And here I've put this is not an exhaustive list, but it is a list of moral issues that if you go on to explore Ayn Rand's work, and both her novels, so things, the most famous of which are Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead, and Anthem. But she wrote a fourth that's very interesting, We the Living. That was her first novel. If you read those, or if you read her nonfiction essays, you'll find her exploring these kinds of issues. So fundamental issues about what's valuable and what kind of principles or virtues of character you should adopt in life. So, some of the things that we've been talking about, or I've been talking about a little bit, self-esteem, or purpose, or things she explores in detail in her writings. But is money something good? Is it the root of all evil? How should one think about money and money as a goal in life? What about fame? Or what about pleasure? What about ambition? Is there something sinful and having ambition? And how does it connect to pride? And is pride a vice or is it a virtue? Is it something you should strive for? It's something you should think there's something wrong with me if I feel proud? What is integrity and courage and cowardice? How should one think about them? And you can go on and on. That there's if you're taking your own life and character seriously and thinking, I can become the person that I want, and then the question is, what person should I want to become? There's a whole host of issues that you have to think about, and this is what the science of ethics, this is what morality, of thinking of good and evil in human terms. These are the kinds of issues that you have to think about. And now what we're going to do in the other talks is highlight some of these, and in particular, Elan's going to talk. I've underlined these. Elan's going to talk about selfishness and altruism. So the conventional view is selfishness is evil, and altruism is the essence of being good, of placing others above self. I've talked about this a bit, but there's a lot more to say about this. And Rand's view was, so long as you're confused about these two issues, and that the conventional view deliberately confuses and obscures how to think about selfishness and how to think about altruism, so long as you have that confusion or deliberate obfuscation on the part of the conventional view, you won't be able to rethink moral issues. So we're going to delve into this more and think more about thinking about selfishness, thinking about altruism. If you're going to question conventional morality, these are among the first things that you have to question and rethink. And then Yaron's going to talk about a bit about thinking this. So this is a very different approach to morality. How, in a more social setting and in thinking of society, of what kind of society does it lead to and why? And how should we think of that? Does it lead to something good, or does it lead to something evil? So it's a moral and a crucial moral issue still, but it's more now, it has a societal focus. So Elan's the focus is more at the individual level. Yaron's going to talk more at the societal level. But they're both about this basic issue of rethinking good and evil. And I've touched on a bit of this, and particularly at the root of what she's rejecting, and what objectivism about is rejecting the conventional view, and the root of the conventional view that where morality comes from is from religion. And if we're going to say, well, we don't want to base it exactly in faith and religion and the supernatural, we'll just secularize it. We'll have the same view, but we'll give it a more secular spin. That is all wrong. And that if you're willing to rethink morality and get that where good and bad comes from is the fact that there's living things and that they need certain things, they need to reach certain goals or values in order to remain living and in order to thrive in life, that if you think of that as that's where good and bad come from, this in the end is where good and evil and the whole issue and need for morality comes from, then you're going to have, if you have that as your base, you necessarily have to rethink all the other issues in morality, because now morality is not at all about the issue of sacrifice. It's about the issue of figuring out what is good for me, not of giving up what's good for me, but of truly figuring it out. And it's not easy to do. And if you're willing to engage in reasoning in regard to this, then you can become self-programming. You can think of it as, I'm now setting my own purpose in a fundamental sense. I'm convinced now this is what's good, this is what's evil. It's not just I'm swallowing this because this is the conventional view. I'm convinced of it, and then I'm going to live up to it. So you can have reason. If you reason about morality, it's a possibility then to have genuine first-handed purposes and fundamental goals in life. And then you can have a perspective of self-esteem. If you live up to it, then if to the question, am I good? Your answer should be, if you're living up to your own view of what is good and evil, and you've thought it through, your answer should be, yes, I am good, and I am deserving of moral self-respect. And this issue of whether on this kind of secular perspective, you've never done enough, don't ever think you're good, don't ever think you've lived up to morality, or on the more religious view, I mean, one translation of that is the idea of original sin. We're all born sinners. And the kind of the perspective that you get today is just this, again, a secularized version of this. Don't ever think that you're good. But if you actually think about the issues of good and evil, and then live up to when you've thought about it and think, if this is what good is, this is what evil is, now I'm going to practice this. I'm going to have the values and build into my soul and character the virtues that this requires. Then you are deserving of self-esteem, and you will have achieved it. And so this is part of the interconnection of the issues. Okay, let me draw a line there. I think we have about 15 minutes left for questions. Here I put up Ayn Rand's 4 novels. If you're looking for places to start in further exploring Rand's worldview, I would start with the novels. But let's now open it up for questions. And I think, Elan, you're going to join back here. And let me—
Thanks, Onkar.
Yeah, let me stop sharing my screen just before I forget.
Two quick things about the question period. So we're actually going to take a break at 55 minutes past the hour. So we'll take as many questions as we can between now and then. And we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll go to the next session. But if your question, we didn't get to your question, rest assured we're going to try to fit them into the question periods as best we can. And there'll be a general question period at the end after all the lectures. And we'll try to get it to as many of them as we can. One other thing I should mention, for those of you who are with us today who had registered to attend this event as it was planned for in Philadelphia, if you ask a question, just mention in your question, or start it with the word Philly, and we'll know, and we'll try to give you some priority in the question queue. We'd like to recognize those people as best we can. All right, Onkar, do you want to pick the first question? We've got quite a few in the queue.
Okay, yeah, let me see what we have. Okay, so here's one about self-esteem. This was from Mark. Our educational system is not great, and part of what I was saying in regard to morality, it presents a conventional view. It never presents that there's alternative views in morality. Very few people, for instance, learn about the Greek approach in morality. And I said there's commonalities between Rand and the Greeks approach. So the question is, tips on how to deal with a hit to self-esteem when you find out that you need to reteach yourself how to think to be able to survive. I don't think that should be a hit to one's self-esteem. I think that should be a boost to your self-esteem. It's part of what it means to take charge of your own life and to think, I'm now going to think about things. So if you come to a view to think, I've sort of just swallowed the conventional view, and now I'm going to stop doing that, and I'm going to challenge some of these things, and I'm going to ask, really, is there any good reason for this? Like, why do I have to give up all my money? And why is that not sufficient? Why is it that I have to give up a kidney? And why to not just strangers, but people who actually hate me? Like, why? Ayn Rand said that what will blast the morality of sacrifice is to ask these kinds of questions. And when you start asking these kinds of questions, you should feel good about yourself. You should feel like I'm taking charge now. And yes, you might find that, yeah, a lot of the things I thought, they're not really true. And I need to change them. And that takes work. But that shouldn't be a hit to your self-esteem. You should feel pride in doing that I'm now taking charge. So self-esteem is not an issue just of, do I know something or do I not? Even deeper than that is, am I trying to know or not? Am I trying to figure it out? And for anyone with an intact mind, you can figure things out if you're trying. So the deeper issue is, are you actually trying? And if you are, that's a good thing. And you should feel like you should evaluate yourself as, I'm doing something good. So that's what I'd say in regard to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add one quick thing to that. I think this was implied in your point, maybe you covered it, but I think it's worth just drawing out, which is in thinking, so part of self-esteem is evaluating yourself, and you highlighted that it's, are you making the effort? I think that I agree with that. The other element is to think of yourself, what were you in a position to know at a given time, and what are you in a position to know now? And you can't look back at yourself and from a position of, you are an ignorant child, you know what to ask, and it's, you can't judge yourself, your old self, based on the knowledge you've gained since then. And so it's important to judge yourself, that's critical, but it's wrong to be overly harsh or sort of hold yourself to an irrational standard. So in that sense, I think that's one reason people might feel like a blow to their self-esteem, because they're thinking, well, I know it now and I should have known it then, but is it really true that you should have known it? So there's a whole progression to knowledge, and it's important to recognize that.
Yeah, that's an important point.
So thanks. That was a question from Mark on Zoom, someone who was going to be at Philly. Let's take a couple more questions while we have time. Oh, I see another one from Philly. So Penny's question, would you like to take that one on?
So the question is, would you agree or wouldn't you agree that secularization isn't the only reason? And so the only reason for what? So the question is, if one has rejected reason, the only thing people have left is to rely on others and to accept the group's consensus as truth. So that is, I think that is true. So the question is getting at, if people abandon their own minds, or if they're taught, you can't really think, you can't figure things out, everybody has their own truth, which really means nobody has it, except for these the teachers who somehow know, well, yeah, you've got your truth and you've got yours, and so, and have this kind of perspective that this is how everything works. So they're not, it's not just, well, this is true for me, but like, this is the truth, they're saying that things are like this. But everybody else, so you can't figure things out, you can't reach knowledge, then it's, how am I going to function? If I can't count on myself and my own thinking, then I have to turn to other people. And it's particularly, I have to turn to the experts, but experts is the wrong word. It's really, I have to turn to the mystics, the elite, who have some other source of knowing what to do, reaching knowledge. So on the religious view, it's, you have to look to the religious leaders and think of the Pope. And it's not an accident that it's, the Pope's infallible. He's got this direct line to God, and he knows, he's somehow, I don't know, and we can't do it. So we have to look to others and follow and obey. So that is an element of it. But that aspect too is a secularization of the religious view. It was the religious view that pushed that people are incapable of reasoning. And more than that, that you shouldn't go by reason. So the moral perspective is, no, life is not about reason, it's about faith. It's not about thinking and asking questions, it's about obedience. And that too was secularized. If you look in the 19th century, say the rise of communism and fascism, they both push this angle that the human mind and the individual is incapable of reasoning, logic doesn't work, there's multiple logics, that's the communist view. So there's the logic for the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, it doesn't lead to the same conclusions and so on. We know, follow us, because you can't know. But that's a secularization of religion as well. So if you really get how deep the religious view was in the Western mind, and then you look at the development, Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment, a lot of it is secularized. And I don't think you can understand the modern world if you don't see that is going on. So that is another factor, but I don't think it's independent from religion.
So we have just about a minute. Let's see if there's a quick question we can answer to get through more of them. We appreciate all your questions, by the way, and I'm thrilled to see so many people from all over the world, not just from the United States. So it's great to have you all with us today. Let's see.
Yeah, it's hard to find one that would be short.
These are all great questions and they take more discussion. That's the challenge. You guys are pushing us. Let's see.
I mean, it can take, I don't know how much interesting, wide interest this is, but the issue of, so I compared human beings to other living things, and that said that our life is radically different than other human things, than other living things. And the question is, what's the difference between intelligence in a frog compared to higher animals? And yes, you do, I think it's right to think of, there's a range of abilities of living things. And a frog is even more, take the issue I was stressing, programmed, pre-programmed. A dog can learn things in a way a frog can't. And even a dog compared to a cat, you can train dogs in a way that you can't train cats. And I think it's a more sophisticated mind that is able to learn things. And then if you go from a dog to a chimpanzee can learn more. But man's learning it's on such a radical different scale, and that is what is important in terms of thinking about human life. And so we're able to think, to reason, to construct arguments, to discover knowledge and keep increasing our knowledge on a scale that is unbelievable. And you can't talk about civilization for any other living thing. And civilization is discovering knowledge and skills and passing them on. And that growing and growing and growing over time. So we learn to hunt, and then we get agriculture, and then we get steam engines, and then we get computers and so on. We have to choose to do all of this and dedicate ourselves to doing this. And that's just on a scale that's not true of any other living thing. So man is the rational animal, and that's not true of other, it's distinctive to man.
Thanks, Onkar. So we're going to take a quick break now for all of you. You can stay logged in if you like and just grab a cup of coffee, take a break, stretch your legs. We'll be back at the top of the hour, whatever time zone you're in, and we'll resume the program then. We'll be back. See you in a few minutes.
Great. Thanks, Elan. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everyone. We're back. This is Ayn Rand Conference live. This was the conference that we were going to hold in Philadelphia, but because of the coronavirus, you can guess why we're here. But we're glad to have you. I know we have people from all over the country and all over the world. It's wonderful that you sharing your Saturday with us. I'm going to start on the next talk, and we'll try to allow a little bit more time for questions than we did in the previous session. And we will also be having a talk after mine by Yaron Brook. And then finally on the program is a general question period. So I hope you'll all you'll join us for as much as you can. I know you probably have other things on the go, but if you're at home practicing social distancing, it's a great way to engage your mind and learn more about Ayn Rand's ideas. So I'm glad to have you. Let's get started. So this talk is the virtue of selfishness. And I want to step back a minute before we dive into exploring Rand's view of what selfishness is and how radical it is. I want to step back a bit and talk about what it is people used to think about the world and life in general, and how much our views have changed, because I think there's an important lesson there. So if we step back and appreciate how much our views have changed, one really startling example, which it's not meant to be comical, but it might be the way we've advanced. So a long time ago, people used to have very strange views. One of the views they had was that the sun goes around the earth. Right? We don't believe that anymore, but people did. And they really thought that was true. They had whole theories about how that works. They also thought that the moon was a perfect sphere, that there were no valleys, no peaks, no rough edges. It was just perfect. And they also thought that living beings, so animals and plants, were just, all those species were just created. They just appeared on Earth when God created Earth. And so they know they don't change over time. Now, each and every one of those views I've just described is wrong. We know it's wrong. And as I said, looking back on it, you might think this is kind of funny. Nobody could possibly believe that. It's the punchline of a joke. And yet, how do we know all that? Because those views were held for a long time. We know that because of individuals like these: Galileo, Darwin, Newton. What they did is they challenged existing beliefs about the world. And they reached fundamental new truths about the world that replaced those dogmas and the false views. We no longer think that the sun goes around the earth, right? We know what the structure of the solar system is, thanks to Newton and other scientists following him and before him. And we understand the dynamics of life on Earth, thanks to the achievements of Darwin and others since. And how do they gain that knowledge that has become the foundation of modern science, that has improved human life in orders of magnitude nobody could have imagined in the past? How did they do that? Well, they used their senses. They looked at the world, they studied it, they used logic, and they figured out the laws of nature. It took a lot of work, it took effort. They unlocked the mysteries of human life and the life of other and sort of the dynamics of other biological things. And that's how we gained such new understanding of the world and the modern world that we enjoy and has improved our lives in ways that are hard to calculate. What I want to suggest to you is that Ayn Rand belongs in the company of these revolutionary thinkers. She's a revolutionary, not in the physical sciences or in life sciences. She's a revolutionary in the science of how to live and how to think, the science of philosophy. And like Darwin and Newton and Galileo and others, Ayn Rand challenges long-held beliefs. For example, beliefs in morality about what is right and wrong, good and evil, what is virtue and what is vice. And fundamentally, how to live your life. She's challenging what most of us have grown up with and have been pounded with, and we've gotten it from our mother's milk, we've gotten it from every direction, and it's all over the place. All the conventional views about what is right and wrong, she's asking us and pointing good reasons for questioning those. And in fact, her conclusion, I think, if you study her views, what you come back, what you get from her is the views that we hold today about what is right and wrong, conventional views, they're as wrong as the view that the sun revolves around the earth. They're no more grounded in fact, in reality, than that false view of the universe. So what Ayn Rand is asking us to do is to rethink morality, to question what is right and wrong. And this is what I'm referring to by her being revolutionary. She's asking us to step away from what we've experienced our whole upbringing and how we think of today, and just review it from a new perspective. And the key point I want to stress is that she's rejecting conventional thinking about morality in favor of adopting a fundamentally new concept of virtue, something better. So she's discarding something false and bad and destructive for the sake of something better, more rational, more supportive of human life. And it's really empowering. Her theory of morality is empowering because it gives you what I think is lacking in today's culture, which is a guide to living. It's a guide for achieving your own happiness. It's the handbook that didn't come with life, or it's the user manual that we all need in the world. So to appreciate how radical Rand's view is and what she actually stood for, I want to spend a few minutes just talking about sort of setting up some context for what it is people take to be right and wrong, and then understand why she rejects it before we get into what it is she's arguing is actually in your what it is to be moral as an individual who's following their mind. So what is it that people think is right and wrong? What are the conventional views of morality? Well, I put on the screen here symbols of major world religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and what I actually think is a secular religion, which is the views that have emanated out of Karl Marx and sort of socialist thinking and communism. Okay, let me just say this at the outset. These are very different views. Let's agree on that. I'm not suggesting that they're interchangeable at all. And clearly they disagree among themselves and they fight, and there's all kinds of friction among them. The reason I put them here is that there's a commonality, a fundamental commonality among them that is worth identifying. And that is that whether you're looking at the 10 Commandments or Allah's laws, or what you're supposed to do for future generations, or living for the nation, or for some cause larger than yourself, or if you're looking at Jesus Christ as an ideal moral figure, the common element in that, the common feature, is that morality, we're taught from every direction, is about doing something other than yourself. It's not focusing on others, in effect. And it's about obedience, not rational arguments. It's not about evidence and logic. It's about following what someone says. So we follow the 10 Commandments, and we do it because there's a good argument? No, because God says so. Allah's laws, because he said so. Future generations, because there's some sort of mystical story about what the socialist revolution is going to accomplish. Jesus, because he sacrificed, and that's the story, and that's what we're supposed to do. That's a model we're supposed to follow. So the common feature I want to stress, again, there are differences, but the common feature that's important for getting what people understand as morality is this idea of sacrifice, or altruism, or which is just a word that means otherism. It means that morality on the conventional view is serving something other than you, something that's non-you. The important thing is that you are giving things up. Now, sacrifice is a term you can ask about it in the question period. The concept of sacrifice, best defined, is giving up something really, really valuable that you treasure, something highly valuable to you, for something that is not valuable or that has zero value to you. So it entails a net loss. It means giving things up. And this is what Ayn Rand rejects. She thinks it's destructive. So let me highlight some aspects of why she thinks it's destructive. And it's important to see that her view is very strong. she's arguing, her claim is very strong. She's saying that altruism, this conventional view that morality is bound up in sacrifice, self-sacrifice, that view isn't just wrong at the margins or difficult. It's that it's evil. It's evil. It's fundamentally wrong. Now, I use the term altruism, and it's a term Ayn Rand uses a lot. It's often confused with the idea of being benevolent to people, having goodwill, and being nice, being a friendly person. This is a real phenomenon. That's the thing that that has a place in human life, but that's not the same thing. In fact, altruism goes against that, and we can talk more about why that is. Altruism as a moral view is about sacrifice, the centrality of giving up the things that are important to you. And if you look at this from the perspective that Rand brings, which is about what it is necessary for a human being to live, what kind of guidance do we need? This offers not only no positive guidance, what it tells you to do is actively subversive of human life. It undercuts human life. It undercuts your mind, it undercuts your self-respect and your self-esteem, and it poisons human relationships. Let me flesh out a bit why, some aspects of why she thinks that. So altruism for Ayn Rand is irrational. There's no rational basis for it. And by that I mean, if you ask what is the source of this, it ultimately goes to some authority figure. Usually from the religious views, it's God, or it's sort of commandments from God. And then in the secularized form, there is no rational basis for it. It's an attack on your mind. You can't ask why. You won't get a good answer. There's no justification for why you would sacrifice. And think about it from the perspective of for no other being would this make sense. Like if you were a dog and every time you got some food, you kicked it away and didn't eat it, you wouldn't last very long, right? Now, for human beings, it literally means the same thing. Anytime you achieve something good, you have to think about, well, what can I do to give away, to give back, to cut it out of my life, to minimize it? And that's the premise that is fundamentally irrational. It means not achieving values in your life, but finding ways to discard them or to hand them off and surrender them. That's not at all a recipe for how to live or flourish. Now, I want to touch on one aspect in which I think altruism as the moral view that many of us absorb is destructive. And it's destructive in many ways. And this isn't meant to be a comprehensive account of the various ways, but let me indicate one. And I think it's really, really important because it goes to, it goes against the assumptions many of us have about altruism, which is that it's about being benevolent and getting along with people. So I think it's poisonous to human relationships. And I'll give you an example from my own experience. So when I was a teenager, I was an unusual teenager at this point because I couldn't wait to get to college. Maybe some of you were like that. I don't know. I don't know how unusual that was, but I was so eager. I went to the library and I checked out college textbooks so I could get ahead and be ready for my classes. I couldn't wait. I was doing other kind of readings to get ready for college. I was really set on getting into a philosophy degree because that's the career path I wanted, because I thought that would be a step towards what I would accomplish in my life. And I was passionate about it. It was really all I could think of for a few years. So one afternoon, I was sitting with my mother and one of my aunts, and we got into a conversation about my college plans. And my aunt, the voice of morality in the family at this point, she pipes up and says, look, Elan, I get you're thrilled to go to college. I get it. Good for you. But, your mom's going to be home alone and she's going to be lonely and she needs you around. She needs help with different things. And I think you should think about making a sacrifice here. She was pretty blunt about it. And she said, we all have to do it. It's part of life. And why do you have to go into philosophy? What's the big deal? How many jobs are there in philosophy? Like, you like carpentry. Why don't you find a job like that? You don't need to go to college. That's a path that will serve your mom well. And, you could find something out of it. And the basic message was, don't follow this dream of yours to go to college. Don't pursue this incredibly important value that you've identified. Set it aside, give it up so that you can prevent your mom from being lonely and dejected. And at the time, I had a very strong negative reaction. I didn't fully understand the reasons for it, but thinking back on it and understanding it from the framework of Ayn Rand's analysis of altruism, I understood what was going on here more with greater clarity. And the issue was that altruism sets people against each other. And it creates this kind of double standard that there are people who have to give things up and there are people who get to collect. And it sets up this idea which it's not coherent. It's some people have to give up, and it's good for you to give up going to college, Elan, and it's good for your mom to collect. Well, why is it good for her to benefit and for me to suffer and give up something really important for me? That doesn't make sense. There's no rational basis for that. Why is that? And in effect, just think about what my life would look like had I really gone down that path. And I mean, I found a way to accommodate my mom because I really care about her, but I didn't want to give up my career plans. But the essential thing that I took from that is, had I gone down this path of giving up what was so important to me, had I sacrificed in this way, what would my life actually look like? I would be in some job I wasn't passionate about. I would probably grow to resent my mother for pushing me into that direction, and definitely hate my aunt for pushing me in that direction, and probably almost certainly hate myself for making that decision, knowing full well what direction my happiness lay. So, I mean, I think this is a very small example, but you can multiply it, and probably there are examples in your own life where you can see when you make this kind of surrender of something really important to you, it is not good for you, and it's certainly not good for the relationships you want to have in your life. So that's just one aspect of how altruism is destructive. Let me touch on one more dimension of this issue. And Onkar, in his previous presentation today, talked about the way in which if you take this idea as a principle, if you try to live up to it consistently, it sets you up for failure because it's an unrealizable ideal. You can never sacrifice enough. So he gave the example of Bill Gates giving up, I think, $40 billion or $30 billion, but he still had other things he could give up. And that's true whether you're Bill Gates, and none of us are, or if you're just who you are. So if you follow this principle and you go to the soup kitchen one Sunday a month, then okay, well, that's one Sunday. Why don't you do it every Sunday? And if you go every Sunday to the soup kitchen, why don't you also devote one afternoon a week from just take off time from work and go help out at the homeless shelter? And why not once a week? Why not just fill your days with that? And then once you're done with the soup kitchen in your town, they're having a real problem down in the town, a few miles away. And once you've exhausted everything, all the need that there exists here, there's many other countries around the world that need help, that need all kinds of people to come and do work for them. So it's an inexhaustible source of need, and you can never sacrifice enough if you take this as a principle. But this is where people go back and say, well, I can't, you don't expect me to go to extremes, right? And they really freak out and they say, well, let's be practical. I can do a little bit of the soup kitchen and I can get on with the rest of my life, the things that really matter to me, the things that I'm true. If I ask myself, honestly, these are the things I really care about and bring me satisfaction in life. And so they have this kind of tension between what they believe to be moral, which is sacrifice in some form, to some degree, and then sort of the extent they can manage it in their life, and the things they really want to do, what they think of as being practical. And so these go against each other so that it undermines your self-esteem and your self-respect, because if you know you can't live up to this ideal, that has to have a view of your evaluation of yourself. You're not living up to this standard. And to the extent that you don't live up to it, the extent to which you're so-called practical and doing the things you want, you enjoy that, you feel guilty for it. So, and this is a really profound way in which this is destructive, because it fuels cynicism. It gives morality a bad name. And it kind of puts people on the path to think that principles are against them. So it's a morality that is anti-human life, and it destroys the best within you. It destroys that aspect of you that wants to live up to an ideal, which is one of the sort of greatest things there is in life, is to live up to things that you believe are true and good. So altruism sets you up with an unrealizable standard that undermines your self-esteem and your integrity, because you can't really look in the mirror and say, yeah, I lived up to this ideal. Look at how much I sacrificed today. Because until you are effectively Jesus Christ on the cross, or Mother Teresa, or someone who gives up every last dollar and then their kidneys and whatever other organs they can, until you do that, you aren't living up to it. And here's the huge contrast with Ayn Rand. So for her, morality is not about teaching you how to sacrifice. It's not about how to endure suffering and how to sort of prepare for death on this path of sacrifice. That's not the point of morality for her. She's rethinking that issue. And morality, on Ayn Rand's view, is a guide to life. It's teach you how to enjoy your life and how to flourish. And for her, the highest moral purpose you can have in your life is to achieve and earn your own happiness by your own means. So let me flesh out what that means. It means being selfish. And this is where people say, they start getting really uncomfortable. Why selfish? Why this term? What, I'm not happy about this. This is making me really unsettled, because selfishness has such a bad reputation as a term. It's a term of abuse, right? If someone calls you that, they're not usually patting you on the back. They're saying, you're a jerk, or you're worse than that. You're the kind of person who lies, cheats, steals, or you're just self-indulgent. You go with your feelings. You're the kind of person who might stab me in the back to get ahead. There's all kinds of associations around this idea of selfishness. And what I want to stress, and we can talk more about this, is that what Ayn Rand means by it is very different from what most people understand it to be. And one aspect that I want to stress, for her, it's certainly not the case that selfishness means disregarding other people's lives, disregarding their rights, exploiting them, lying to them, cheating them out of things. That is not at all in your interest, according to Ayn Rand's theory. And I think it's self-destructive. And what selfishness just means is that you are the beneficiary of your own action. You get to benefit from the action you take. And part of what's really distinctive in Ayn Rand, in her theory, is that there are no sacrifices. So you get the part that you aren't sacrificing for other people. That falls out of selfishness fairly directly. But the other element, which is really critical to how different it is from what people assume selfishness is that there are no sacrifices in any direction of anyone to anyone. So just as you won't sacrifice to other people, you shouldn't sacrifice to other people. You shouldn't sacrifice them to you. You shouldn't be someone who exploits other people. There are no sacrifices. It's a non-sacrificial morality. None, ever. And that's really distinctive. So it rules out all the sort of the caricatures of selfishness, like the crook and the killer and the person who's sort of trampling over people, the backstabber, the jerk, all those things. They're not part of what the concept of selfishness really means in Ayn Rand's theory. So I want to spend a few minutes just sketching out what selfishness actually consists of, because most people's reaction, if you get them past the idea, okay, well, she's saying it's not about being sort of a liar and a cheat and a crook, it's something else. Well, but we all know what it means to be selfish. That's pretty straightforward. It comes easily to everybody. We just, we can go with our feelings, or it just wells up inside us. We know what we want. Our interest is obvious, right? And a lot of people think that we're either automatically pursuing our self-interest and just have to rein it in, or it's not that hard an issue. And in fact, the task of morality is to guide you. This is Ayn Rand's conception of morality. The task is to help you think through and identify what actually is in your interest, because it's not obvious, it's not automatic, and you're not infallible. You're going to make mistakes because it takes effort and thought to figure out what it is to pursue your self-interest. So I want to illustrate that and just sketch out what this looks like. So in contrast to what most people think selfishness is, like you go with your gut or it's automatic, you can easily do it, you can figure it out. It's not at all the case. You need the guidance of virtues, of moral principles that are advice giving. And in Ayn Rand's morality, the central advice giving principle, the central virtue is rationality. And rationality means a number of things, but I'll just sort of stress these, which is, it means following your reason, your mind, and using that as the source of knowledge, what you believe to be true and false. And it means that it's also the only source of values, what you identify to be good and evil. And it's also the only source for guiding your action. So you have to follow your mind. That's sort of the encapsulation of reason. And this is in contrast with what people assume selfishness is often about, which is go with your gut, follow your feelings. Now, emotions are hugely important in life. Ayn Rand is not against emotions. And emotions are valuable in thinking about what it is you're responding to, but they're not themselves a guide to action. They're not sufficient. They're the beginnings of a thought about what you might be interested in, but they're not themselves a means of identifying what is actually true or what is valuable, what is in your interest. And you can't go by your emotions. You need to think about them, you need to process them. And just to illustrate that our emotions are not really guiding, just think of two kind of cases. One where something feels good, right? So, if you like donuts, I know someone who really loves donuts, and the person feels like having 15 iced donuts. And this is their, like, they love it. It's the sugar kind of, they can feel it on their tongue. They feel the buzz through their body. They're kind of a little energized from the sugar, and they enjoy the sweetness and the tart from the jam and then the frosting, and they have this incredible experience. It lasts about 5-10 minutes if they can eat as many donuts as they actually feel like eating. But then what? What happens to you? I mean, giving into that is going to have negative consequences in the short term. You're going to feel lousy. It's going to upset your body. And as a matter of health, it's not good for your body to have this amount of donuts in your life. So it might feel good, but it's certainly not beneficial to you as a long-term policy and action, certainly even in the short term. So the things that you feel like doing that are not, obviously, they're not in your self-interest when you think about it momentarily and subjected to the analysis of reason. But then you can flip it, and there are things that that are good for you to do that are in your interest, but don't feel good to do. That you might feel reluctant to do. You might even avoid doing. So here's an example where, so you're working on a project at work, and one of your coworkers who's on the team, like for weeks now, they're not pulling their weight. And you realize that if you don't step in and say you need to pull your weight, or if you don't say, pull your weight or leave the project, or catch up, or one of these options, you need to have a difficult conversation with them. And unless you do that, this project is going to collapse. It's going to injure your position at work. It might even harm the company and imperil people's jobs. This is a critical project for you. And you need to have this conversation. It doesn't feel good. A lot of people hate those kinds of conversations. They hate and they avoid conflict everywhere in their personal life and work. And so here's a case where something is evidently in your interest to do. It doesn't feel good. So here's a case where emotions are not a reliable guide. They can't tell you what actually is in your interest. They're the beginnings of thinking about that, but they're certainly nowhere near sufficient for thinking about that. And they can obviously lead you astray. So it's the cardinal instruction that the virtue of rationality gives you is you need to go by the facts and logic, and you need to follow them wherever they lead you, regardless of whether you like the conclusion or not. You need to be objective about these things. Now, rationality for Ayn Rand is the central virtue, and there are derivative virtues that I just want to touch on briefly, and I won't get into all of them. The reason I want to mention them, however, is to stress the contrast with how people often think about selfishness. Automatic, easy to do, self-evident, what's in your interest is not at all the case. And the takeaway from the fact that these virtues are identified is that these are necessary to guide you in thinking about and sort of taking your path through life. And it takes real thought. That's sort of the takeaway here. So to be an egoist means to be honest, to be committed to the facts, not to faking them. It means having integrity to your ideas and action, to your rational principles. It means being productive, not being a parasite on other people, having pride, and this means really taking seriously your own moral character and aiming at and achieving moral perfection, which in fact, by the way, Ayn Rand thinks you can achieve moral perfection. And you need to judge people. You need to apply the principle of justice. And again, this is one more principle in Ayn Rand that is very unfashionable today, if you want to put it that way. People don't like this idea of judging, but in fact, if you follow the evidence, reality tells you that you need to be able to sort people who are in your life so that you bring in good people and you move away from people who are not going to be conducive to your own happiness and success in life. Whether that means you don't like them, they're not friendly, that you don't want to be friends with them, or people who are not honest enough to be in business with, people you don't want to hire, who you should associate with. All of these have incredible implications for your life. And it's important to judge them objectively and then act accordingly. There's a lot to say about this, but I'm just sketching this because I think it's crucial to get that the advice or the principle of rationality, the idea of following reason as a means to achieving your own happiness in life, it requires thought, rational thought, a commitment to the facts. And that takes us to the final one of these, which I have here on the list, independence. This is something that I don't think other theories have as a conception of this is a moral virtue. And for Ayn Rand, independence means following your own judgment, putting nothing above your own judgment. And I want to highlight this because I think it's a distinctive virtue in her theory. If some of you may have read The Fountainhead, and if you haven't, that's okay. But if you have, then this will resonate with you. The hero of that novel, Howard Rourke, is a really vivid dramatization of this virtue of independence. So let me give you kind of the headline of what independence is about and just illustrate it with a couple of examples and why this is so central to being a rational egoist on Rand's theory. So as I said, independence means following the facts and putting your own judgment above everything else. And it means, another way to put it is you're orienting yourself to the facts, not to other people, and not to convention, and not to authorities, and not to what they say, or so all these secondhand opinions that we can pick up from the culture. And this is a sort of fundamental issue in life, but it's especially so in sort of the culture that we have today, where there are incredible pressures from every direction, from family, from tradition, from religious authority, all sorts of pressures for us to follow certain paths of thinking, regardless of whether we think they're right or wrong. But that's what the right people think. You should do the same. And for Ayn Rand, independence means pushing back on that and saying, no, I'm going to believe the things that I've judged to be right based on evidence and logic. And I don't care what convention says. A million French people can be wrong. And it's not a matter of numbers. It's a matter of facts and objectivity. So I wanted to stress what independence is about from a very personal perspective. So I think there are situations in life where independence becomes a kind of a turning point kind of issue. It's sort of the wider perspective is independence is necessary in every area of life, in all my issues. But I want to stress it in two particular areas. So let me give you a couple of examples. One is about your career path. So I mentioned the example of my wanting to go into philosophy. So this didn't actually happen to me, but here's a situation I think is a common one, and you can, maybe some of you will recognize this in your own experience. So you are about to leave college and you know the path you want to go on. You have a very clear picture of what you judge to be your career path. And you want to be a teacher. you get such satisfaction. You've done some practice teaching, you get satisfaction, and you're really thrilled by being in a room full of elementary school kids and seeing their faces light up when they understand something new, and their curiosity and their relentlessness about learning about things that they're passionate about. And you want to be in the role of facilitating that as a teacher. That's what you have decided is your passion in life. And that's the path you're taking. And then you get a call from your parents. Well, didn't we talk about you going to med school? We've got the applications ready for you. It's time. And they want you to go to medical school because, and they have all sorts of reasons for it. This is what they've expected of you. This would be prestigious for the family to have a doctor in the family. You would make good money. It's a career with lots of possibilities. And above all, this would make your parents happy. But you can't imagine being a doctor. You don't want to go to med school. It's going to be dragging yourself through misery for all those years. And on top of it, you are grossed out by sick people. Some people are, some people aren't, but you are. You don't want to be around all the blood and the fluids, and it's just not what you can even imagine wanting to do. So here you are. Your parents are pressuring you to go to medical school and take that direction in your life. And you've formed your own conclusion based on real evidence and your real experience of what you want to do with your life. Which path do you take? Do you let your parents and their wishes and their desire and what would make them happy direct your path? Are you going to become the puppet of their wishes? Are you going to let them be in the driver's seat of your life? Or are you going to sort of be what Onkar called in the earlier session, a self-programmer, someone who sets their own conception of what is right and wrong by observing the world and reaching it first-handed? That is what independence guides you to do. It says it's your life. You need to own it. You take responsibility for reaching the conclusions of what you want to do, what you think is right and wrong, in disregard of what convention says, what secondhand opinions would push you to do. And it can mean that you're going to disagree with people because they want you to do one thing, but it's your life and you have to be the one who makes those decisions. You can't abdicate that responsibility for someone else and expect to be happy, because imagine the path you take where you're serving someone else's wishes. That's not a good direction to take. You can just sort of forecast what kind of misery you'd be if you drag yourself through all those years of medical school. You're hating it. You probably will grow to resent your parents and all the financial pressure that you feel going through a medical training that you don't want, and the burden of that brings. So there's a real issue here of, are you the one who's directing your life by your own judgment, or are you letting other people do that? And it's hugely consequential, right, in this particular case. Let me give you one more case, because I think this cuts across all areas of life, but career and love, which is the second example, are really fundamental to what will bring you happiness in life. So in life, I think this kind of phenomenon about romance and relationships is very common. So I grew up in a secular but Jewish household, mostly secular. And one of the puzzling things was when my brother was dating someone, or if I mentioned someone I was seeing, one of the questions my mom would always ask is she Jewish? Because that was very important to her. It's very common in Jewish families. It's a super big deal in many Muslim communities. It's also true in Christian communities. We don't want a non-Catholic in the family. It's true for Hindus. It's in all sorts of cultures and communities. And sometimes it's not about religion. Sometimes it's just, is this person from our community? Who are they? They're very different from us. Now suppose that you fall in love with someone who's an outsider. Maybe they're not Jewish or Christian or Muslim. Maybe they're not a good Catholic. Or maybe they're just poorer than your family. But you've reached the conclusion, you know first-handedly by your own evidence, you've thought about this, you know what your emotions are telling you, you verify them, you know this person, you've found someone you want to share your life with. And you find that because they're an outsider, your parents and your friends and your aunts and uncles, they pressure you. They don't want this person as part of the family. They don't want this person for you. And they're telling you this is it. You can't have this person and you can't marry this person. And what do? Do you go by your own judgment, your own conclusion, or do you succumb to the pressure to, even though you love this person, you have to turn away from that and go find someone who belongs to your tribe, your community, your religion, to satisfy this social convention or this religious convention or this tribal convention, and keep the peace with your parents? Or are you going to put your foot down and just, this is my life and I'm going to make this decision? That's the kind of perspective, that's the kind of guidance that independence tells you that you need. You need to be the one who's identifying and reaching conclusions for yourself, because it's your life and you are the one who has to be in the driver's seat if you want to achieve your own happiness in the end. So it's just sort of zooming out a bit, the virtue of selfishness or egoism in Rand's conception of it is about using your mind to identify the values that are crucial to you and crucial to your path and conception of your happiness in life, whether it's a career or a romantic partner, or at every level of values that we have, from the mundane to the fundamental and profound. You need to be the one who finds these first-handedly, not borrowing kind of passively from outside sources. And this is crucial to your happiness. And that, in the end, is the point of morality for Ayn Rand. It's your own happiness. It's about finding the goals in life, in developing the kind of character and values of character that will put you on the path to the goals and values that are going to give you your one shot at life and make it as best you can in sort of the happiest possible experience you can achieve in your life. It's going to put you on that path. What I wanted to stress as in wrapping up before we get to questions is that what I hope you take from this discussion of Rand's view of morality is that she's pushing away altruism as the conventional view and asking us to rethink what morality is about, and for the sake of reaching a better, more rational conception of what is virtue. And it's very different from conventional views, and it really is, it's radical. It goes to the fundamentals of this issue. And it's very different from what people think she's saying. So there's many sort of superficial understandings of Rand and what selfishness is. What she's saying is to be selfish means to follow your mind, follow reason, always, in every area of life, as a matter of principle. To be selfish means living up to a code of morality and a set of rational virtues that point us in the direction of achieving happiness. That, in the end, is what the virtue of selfishness is about. So let me draw a line here, and thank you for being part of this presentation, for joining us today. I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Onkar Ghate, and we'll take some questions now. Hi, Onkar.
Hi, Elan. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, we have some good questions, so let me start you off. So first, you were talking about, and I've been talking as well, about rethinking moral issues. So here's one about, so we've been talking, and you were talking about selfishness, altruism. So how should one think about generosity and helping others from a self-interested perspective? So that I take that as the first question.
So the wider one is helping other people. And I think of it as, the essential, it has to be that it's non-self-sacrificial. That there are lots of people that, so if you find someone, I guess there are two things. One is it's non-self-sacrificial, and the person that you want to help is deserving. And they're in a position where they need help, but for no fault of their own. It's not some negligence of their own or some, so for example, if someone you know and care about has fallen sick, and you ever have the resources, you can drive over and you can make a lasagna and drive over and hand it to them so they have an easier time and have to cook. I think that's perfectly appropriate and in your interest. If the person matters to you, it's not a sacrifice to you. In fact, investing in that relationship is of value to you. So you might think of doing that and even more things if you can do it and you can afford to do it. Maybe you can afford their medical costs. what I think is ruled out is helping people who are in need because of their own fault, and whom you don't care about, and it would be a sacrifice to you, whatever resources you have. So if you're helping someone who is, so that they're through their own choices, they've become homeless, like they live on the streets, and they're not interested in finding a job and getting off the streets. They're interested in just begging at the corner of the traffic light. I don't think it's in your interest to help that person. This would not be generous. It would be self-sacrificial to help that kind of person. So that's sort of a first cut at that. Did you want to build on add anything to that?
I just say that Al, that generosity is usually used in a context where the other person isn't entitled and can't think of themselves as entitled. As against, so if you have a friend who they've lost their job or they got coronavirus and you go over to help them, there's a perspective that that person, if you do nothing, they'll think, yeah, the guy's not really my friend. So in that sense, they're entitled for something. If you're, it's a real friendship. It goes two ways. Whereas generosity, if you're, say you give money to scholarships in mathematics because you really value minds making progress in this field, so they can't view it as, well, we're somehow entitled to this money and but there are selfish reasons to be generous in that sense and to say, like, this is a real value to me. I want to see it further, even though the other person can't view it as I'm entitled to this in some sense. So I think that's part of why it's related but different than helping others. It brings in other considerations. Okay, so a second question. And you, at the end of the talk, talked a little bit about happiness, and that's what it's all about. So is it selfish, so for example, to help others if you get pleasure from it, or if it makes you happy? So is that what is being said?
No. So I think people can, because of the way our emotions work, people can find that they get some sort of positive experience from doing something that is in fact self-sacrificial. It's not beneficial to their lives. So it's not a signal that you're doing something selfish, that you're experiencing a positive reaction to it. And you can have sort of mixed motivations for things. What I would say is that you have to evaluate whether something is in your interest based on the facts. And it might not be the case that it feels good to do it. So, I mean, I don't think that's the way to parse this out. Now, let me say one more thing about the issue of emotions. Emotions are, as I said in the talk, they're important, but you have to parse them out and understand why you're reacting to something as you are, and then fit it into the wider context of what you know to be true, and what is the context. So one can have the idea that consciously you're trying to live by this principle of being self-interested, but you've adopted, or long ago you accepted as a premise that you should help the needy in some self-sacrificial way, and it's in there. It's part of your thinking. It's on sort of buried deep inside, and you've got mixed motivations now. So subconsciously you feel, well, I should be doing this, and I'll feel good if I do it. So there's a clash between what your assumptions and premises, some of which are wrong, are pointing you to do, and what your conscious thinking is pointing you to do. So it's not a guide to say, well, I did something sacrificial and I liked it, or I did something self-interested and I didn't like it. Because honestly, I had to go to the dentist next Monday. I'm not looking forward to it, but I need to go. And if I didn't go, that would be really bad for my health. So I hope that sort of touches aspects of that question.
Okay, good. Here's the third question. This is a question, I mean, it's a good question, but it's a question that's often raised. So you dealt with it some in the talk, but if you want to expand, and make it a kind of two-part because they're very related. Does Ayn Rand address the conventional view of selfish, of It's about stabbing people in the back, cutting their throat. I think the example in the question was, it's someone who takes all the cookies from the cookie jar, even though they're supposed to be there for whatever, all the students or all the employees. And so does she address that? And why does she use the term?
Yeah, so the answer is she does address it. The place to look for her own, and I'm just going to sketch a summary of it, but the place to look is in the introduction to her book, The Virtue of Selfishness. And she's deliberate in using the term. So she points out that the conventional view of selfish is it's a bad sort of conception of the issue. It's not a valid way of thinking because it puts together things that don't go together. The person who steals all the cookies sort of thoughtlessly, and the person who is working, that's sort of one conventional view of self-interest, or someone who's doing worse things, right? Who's stealing bigger amounts of money or harming people and so on. The brute, as she calls it, who's sort of will walk over corpses. That is a caricature, because selfish actually means someone who's thinking and creating values and trying to build win-win relationships with people for mutual benefit. So when you think of someone who's selfish, what should come to mind is someone like Bill Gates, whom you mentioned, who created Microsoft and had this vision of a computer on every desk in every home. He created enormous value, and he did it because he was really passionate about programming and software and creating a business. That has there's nothing fundamentally in common between that kind of achievement, or you think of Steve Jobs, one of my heroes, or Thomas Edison, another of my heroes. They create real value in the world, and they offer it to other people to trade, versus the person who's stealing cookies thoughtlessly, the person who's like the Harvey Weinstein kind of exploiter of people. There's fundamentally a difference between those people, and she's saying that we should think of the concept of selfish anew. We should rethink it, because these don't go together under this heading. We need to think of selfish and conceptualize the sort of rational actions that people are taking under that heading, and why that term. And I think she wants to be provocative. She's, as you put it in your presentation, she's trying to get us to rethink these fundamental issues. And this is a wedge. This is a really sharp wedge. It's saying to people, you should be uncomfortable because you're operating on ideas that you have no reason to believe. They're false. They're as false as the idea that the sun goes around the earth. And you can't live a happy life if you're a hostage to this kind of thinking. So those are some of the reasons. Now, those are my way of putting it. She has her own way of putting it in the book.
I'll say one other thing on that, because it relates to some other questions that have been raised. So there have been questions in the vein of what are the arguments for altruism, and that life should be about sacrifice and giving up. I brought up in my talk that one of the major arguments is it's demanded or commanded by God, and that can be secularized. But another of the major arguments is this issue. It's that you have two choices in life. You can be an altruist, which means sacrificing your values, your money, your time, your interest to other people, or you can be selfish, which means you're exploiting other people, stabbing them in the back, stealing from them. And those are your two choices. And if people faced with those two choices, they don't want to be the selfish person. I don't want to be victimized and exploiting. I don't want to be Harvey Weinstein. So I guess I have to be self-sacrificial. And her view, part of what she's arguing is these are not the alternatives in life. And one of the ways she puts it in a very memorable way is, and she calls this the greatest fraud ever perpetrated on mankind. We're given two alternatives. You can be a masochist, who I inflict damage on myself, give up my values, give up my interests, because the alternative is being a sadist, that I'm going to inflict pain on other people. And when you put it, it's no sacrifices ever. It's what she's presenting is a way of life that is neither of these things. And it's such a damning indictment of our intellectual culture that nobody can envision an alternative. And so what happens is Bill Gates, well, he's obviously, pre all his charitable activity, he's not an altruist. He's making oodles and oodles of money. So he's not an altruist. What is he? He's selfish. That means he steals and exploits other people. when he self-evidently doesn't. But that's what he must be, and so we need the Justice Department to go after him. And that's what happened to him. And so this is not some terminological issue. This is a fundamental issue of how people look at the world. And her view is the tools you're using completely distort. Okay, another question related to self-interest and helping sort of define and delineate Rand's view is the question about Adam Smith. So Adam Smith talks about self-interest, particularly in the economic realm. And are they in agreement in regard to self-interest or partial agreement? So how would you answer that?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer very briefly, and then what I'm going to suggest is we roll this into the Q&A period because we're almost at time for this session. The answer is no. My understanding of Smith's view is that we are each self-interested for the sake of sort of a wider cultural, social betterment, right? So that, individually we might be trying to build our business and so on, but it's for the sake of there being, it's sort of justified, in other words, justified because it leads to better social outcomes, or collective outcomes. And Rand's view is not that. It's that you as an individual, to live and thrive, you need to be self-interested. And by the way, yes, if you're in a social setting and there's incredible value to be gained from trading with other people. And Yaron will talk more about this in a moment, about sort of what is the case for a free society. But it's so that you can live free, independent, you as an individual can live according to your own judgment. That's the essential issue, not so that you can sort of add to the social benefits of society. Though that is true, that when everyone is free and able to do that, everyone else benefits. There's incredible consequences to that. So I want, in the interest of giving everyone a break, just to stretch their legs, grab a cup of coffee, why don't we take a break and we'll be back with Yaron Brook at the top of the hour. Thanks, everyone.
Elan, there was a suggestion of doing the polling now rather than at the end. So
yeah, that's great. And while, as soon as you get back to your seat to rejoin us, why don't you take a moment and answer this poll, which I'll leave up during the break. We'll see you in a moment. Thanks.
Is anybody there? It's Yaron.
Hi, Yaron. We're going to resume right now. So
Okay,
thanks for joining us.
So the host has to approve, you have stopped it. The host has stopped my video.
I'm just fixing that right now.
All right.
So, Yaron, are you able to activate your video?
One second. I think so. Well, where is it? Come on. Come on. All right, give me a second.
All right, everyone, we're just going to stay on break until we're able to connect with our third speaker, Yaron Brook. So those of you coming back, thank you for joining us. Thanks for taking part in the poll. We appreciate it. It's helpful. We're always interested to see what level of knowledge people have when they come to our events. All right, there you are, Yaron. Great to have you. Thanks for joining us today. I just want to welcome those people who've come. If you weren't here earlier, and you just joined us, welcome. This is AynRandCon Live. We were going to be in Philadelphia, but we're online. And the benefit of that is we have many more people who can join us from all over the world, not just those in Philadelphia. One quick thing, we have a lot of questions in the queue, which is really thrilling. We're going to do a question period about Yaron's talk right after his talk. And then after that, we'll have 30 minutes devoted just to question period. All three of us will be there. And we'll try to work through as many of these questions as we can. All right, let me introduce Yaron Brook. He is the host of the Yaron Brook Show. He's an author of a number of books. He is also chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute's board of directors. Yaron Brook, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Elan. This is exciting. I was going to be in Philadelphia today, but this is great. It's great to see so many people online. It's great to see so many people from so many different countries. So welcome everybody, and thanks for being here. All right, so today you've heard from Onkar and you've heard from Elan about really the radical nature of Ayn Rand's ideas. Primarily, we've talked today about the radical nature of ideas in ethics. The idea of self-interest, of selfishness, and contrasted with altruism. So what I want to do in the next, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes, and then we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A, because I know there's a lot of accumulated questions and a lot of questions that are going to come up now. What I want to do is talk about the implication of this radical view in ethics in politics, which is the study of how we build societies when we all come together, when we interact with one another. Ethics is primarily about how we live our lives, about ourselves. And ethics applies, certainly it applies in every circumstances. It applies in your day-to-day life. It applies in every decision you make. It applies on a desert island, and it applies when you're interacting with other human beings. Politics is the application of that ethics, the application of an ethics to how we interact in a social context. So let me start by doing it this way. You know, a lot of people I think intrigued and confused and bewildered by the popularity these days of socialism. You know, Bernie Sanders, even though he's not doing as well as some expected, is a self-avowed socialist and is doing quite well. AOC, you've got lots of politicians out there who are advocating socialism, and generally among young people, not just, thanks for reminding me to take that off, although when Q&A starts, I'll have to put it back on. It's not just in politics. You know, we have academics at universities, we have socialist student clubs, we have a vast, you know, somewhat bewildering popularity of a political ideology that everywhere, and to the extent that it is tried, has failed. And I'm not gonna give you another history of socialism. I'm just gonna assume that you understand that it's failed, that it is a unsuccessful political ideology, wherever and whenever, and to the extent that it is tried, it to that extent fails. And yet, and it's incredibly popular. And it's not even that the people who advocate for this idea deny that it has failed. What they typically say is, but next time we can actually do it better. We can do it right next time. And it's bewildering to most of us because, well, wait a minute, you've tried it 100 times, you've tried it 1,000 times, you've tried it in so many different variations, so many different places, and it fails. Why does this idea still have such a strong appeal on people, primarily the young? And I think if you don't understand the relationship between ethics and politics, this is truly bewildering, and this is truly a mystery, and this is hard to understand. But let's think for a moment about the ethic that is dominant in our culture. And Onkar and Elan have talked about this. The ethic that's dominant in the culture is an ethics of otherism. It's an ethic of altruism. It's an ethic that says that the purpose in life, the ethical purpose in life, is other people. That virtue, nobility, morality, being a good person entails being selfless, entails sacrificing. And sacrificing being the idea of giving up a value for and getting nothing or something less valuable in return. So being worse off, that's what a sacrifice is. It means being worse off. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a sacrifice. It would be more like an investment. If you're going to be better off in the future because of what you do now, that's not a sacrifice. The whole idea of a sacrifice is that you are worse off, that you're taking a step backwards. And backwards from what? Backwards from life, backwards from your values. So we live in a world in which the popular common ideology is that of sacrifice, that of selflessness. And particularly among the young, who tend to be idealistic about their morality, tend to want to apply their morality more consistently, tend to believe that they can build a world based on their morality. So they tend to be idealistic. Well, they want to take this morality of altruism, of caring for others, of placing the well-being of others above their own well-being, a morality of selflessness. They want to take that and manifest it politically. They want to manifest it in how we relate to one another, because the morality is all about how we relate to one another. And of course, the political ideology most consistent with such a morality is socialism. I mean, what does socialism advocate? It advocates sacrificing those who have for those who haven't. Well, that makes sense. We should be focused on the well-being of others, and who needs to be focused on the most? Well, those who have the least, those who are the most needy. And sacrifice is noble, sacrifice is good. So it's okay to sacrifice some, particularly people who are so-called privileged, I hate that word, for the sake of those who do not have anything. So sacrifice is built into socialism, and sacrifice is a moral, noble, beautiful thing. So how could we be against it? Socialism is about the good of society, the public good, the good of everybody, not you, not specifically an individual, but some amorphous group, some undefined entity called the public. Well, that's great. That's non-selfish. That's non-self-interested. That's selfless. That's them. I can focus on them. That's good. And again, if I have to sacrifice for that, if I have to pay higher taxes or not be able to pursue my values and not be able to pursue my profession or not be able to do what I really want to do with my life, that's okay, because this is what virtue requires. This is what morality demands. And of course, altruism, because it emphasizes the idea of selflessness, it undermines the idea of, and Onkar talked about this, of self-esteem, of self-confidence, of the efficacy of your own mind. Then who knows what's good for the group, for the other, for the public? I don't know, and why would I trust my mind? And that would be really selfish if I just relied on my own reason to determine what's good for others. And that, of course, leaves one susceptible to the expert, the philosopher king, the elite, the elitist that is going to tell me, well, this is the sacrifices we need. This is what is good for the common. This is what is good for others. This is how you should sacrifice. So to the extent that a culture takes its altruism seriously, and particularly to the extent that young people want to be idealistic and take that morality seriously, and to the extent that that culture is altruistic, to that extent, it'll be socialist. I mean, indeed, I think the puzzle and the thing that should amaze us is that we're not even more socialist than we are. And that, I think, is, as an aside, credit to our founding fathers and the spirit they created in America, which is very anti-altruism in spite of this. So there's a battle between a certain spirit of individualism, a certain spirit of the pursuit of happiness, a certain spirit of self-interest, which is reflected in our business lives, which is reflected in kind of the self-help attitude that most Americans have. They want to be better, they want to be happy, clashing with our morality. If we just relied on morality, we would really be socialists. But Ayn Rand presents a completely different moral view. And what I want to do now is talk about what kind of political system that moral view necessitates. So that if our spirit, if for whatever reason we believe capitalism is good and socialism is bad, the only way we can fight, in my view, for capitalism is by rejecting altruism and adopting this moral code that Ayn Rand articulates, because it is the only moral code. It is the only moral foundation for this system of capitalism. And let's see why that is and how that is. Well, we've talked about this idea of living your life based on your own reason, in pursuit of your own values, in pursuit of the values you deem necessary for your survival, for your thriving, for your flourishing, ultimately for your happiness. It is your judgment, your mind, which is your tool for living life. This is foundational to Ayn Rand's view of self-interest. Reason is a cardinal value. Rationality is the integrating virtue. We just had Elan explain that. So to live well, to live as a human being, but even just to survive, we must use our rational faculty. We must use our mind. I mean, when I have live audiences, I would typically tell you to look around the room and observe. You can't do that right now, but maybe there are other people around you where you are, and just observe what a pathetic animal we are physically. How physically, from a purely materialistic perspective, we couldn't survive. We couldn't have beaten the saber-toothed tiger. We couldn't have hunted the bison. We couldn't have eaten. We couldn't have survived at the most basic level if we just relied on our physicality. From really the beginning of mankind, we have needed to rely on our minds. As Leonard Peikoff puts it, reason is our basic means of survival. We cannot survive without using reason. We cannot hunt. We cannot build tools. We cannot agriculture, cannot do agriculture. All of those require thinking, never mind using Zoom and video conferencing a seminar across the world in live time with people participating and, multiple speakers and multiple, I mean, inconceivable to people even just a few decades ago, and now just a relatively trivial thing. All of that requires the use of the human mind. So man's life requires thinking. Man's life requires reasoning. It requires an independent mind, the ability to observe facts of reality, integrate them, and discover knowledge, discover truths. But that requires something once we get into a social context, once we have other people to deal with. Because what can other people do to us that can actually restrain our ability to think, restrain our ability to be an independent thinker, to actually look out into the world, to discover truth, to articulate truth, and then to act on those truths? What is an impediment? What is the one thing that can actually stop us from thinking, or at least make thinking so painful, so futile, that we lose all motivation to do it? What can other people do to us to restrict the ability to pursue the one value necessary for our own survival? Well, the one thing they can do is they can put a gun to our heads, tell us to obey, tell us to follow orders, tell us to ignore our own thinking. Think of Galileo's house arrest. What did that do to Galileo's mind? Did he go into that house arrest fully motivated to discover new truths in physics, to publish them and articulate them and teach us all? No. If he continued to do that, he risked being burnt at the stake. His books would have been burnt. There would have been no way for him to communicate with the rest of us. A gun had been placed to his head, the equivalent of a gun. And not only did it silence his hand in writing or silence his voice, but it silenced his mind. He went into that room or that house or wherever it was under house arrest. And how do you motivate yourself to think new thoughts, to discover new truths when you can't articulate them? And if you do, you risk death. If you're interested, as a young scientist out there, in exploring life extension technologies, how to allow human beings today to live to be 150 or maybe older. There's a lot of interesting, fascinating science going on looking at this. But the government today says, we're not interested in that kind of science. We're not interested in your products. We're not interested in your discoveries around that kind of science. And without our approval, without our stamp of approval, you can't market them. You can't sell them. You can't bring them to market. You can't turn it into a business. Called regulation, the FDA. How many people are going to let their minds, are going to focus their minds on that issue? How motivated can you be when you know it's a dead end? Because even if you make a discovery, nobody's going to let you actually be able to get it out there into the world, to get a product, to sell a product, and put aside making the money. It's more about the ability to change the world. Regulations shrink the scope of our thinking because they are force, because they tell us you cannot go there, you cannot do that. So the thing that restricts the human mind, that makes human thinking, our ability to think, futile, meaningless, is force, coercion, an authority with a gun, an authority with the ability to impose itself on all of us. So if you care about your own life, if you're truly selfish, and importantly, because you care about your own life, you care about your own mind, you care about your ability to think, to independently think, often to think differently than other people, to disagree. And then to be able to take those thoughts and apply them in reality, whether in business, whether in writing a book, whether in who you want as a friend or a lover, you want to use your mind and act on your rational thoughts, your rational conclusions. If you value that, then you recognize that the true enemy, your true enemy, is in a social context, other people trying to force, other people trying to coerce you, other people trying to impose their views on you. I mean, they can argue, we can debate, we can disagree, but once you pull out a gun, once you make a fist, I am silenced. My life is in real jeopardy. So for Ayn Rand, the most important idea that of social interaction is that force be excluded. And look, before I elaborate on that, I think it's important to say that Rand's individualism, Rand's selfishness is not about isolation. It's not about going living on a desert island or in some forest all by yourself and producing your own food. And no, other human beings are massive value to us. They produce products that are hugely beneficial to our lives. Whether it's works of art, whether it's iPhones, whether it's books, whether it's food. I don't want to have to go out and raise my own food. I like that food comes from the supermarket. And the way in which we most benefit from interacting with other human beings is by letting them live their lives, by letting them think for themselves, by letting them use their minds to live the best life for themselves, hopefully producing values necessary for their survival, and that some of those values are valuable to me as well, and then interacting with them through trade, whether it be material or spiritual, through voluntary transactions, through voluntary trade. That is the appropriate way for human beings to live in a civilized society. That is the only way we can maximize the benefits of living in such a society. And it is the only way a truly selfish human being wants to live. A desert island is a huge sacrifice. So we want to live in society, but we understand that the one thing we need to eliminate from society is force. And for that purpose, we institute government. Government is a human institution. And the purpose of this institution, according to Rand, is to be the monopoly over the use of retaliatory force. A government that doesn't initiate violence, never initiates force, does not coerce, does not serve as an authority, other than it only uses force. It only is coercive as an act of self-defense to protect my freedom. Now, we have a concept, and it's a concept that, it comes out of the Enlightenment, comes out of Enlightenment philosophy, but I think Ayn Rand sharpens its definition. We have a concept to capture this idea that in a civilized society, and in a civilized society, force, coercion, authority should be eliminated, should be extracted. That concept is the concept of individual rights. Now, rights are a moral idea. They're an idea about how an individual should live his life. They basically say the way an individual should live his life is in pursuit of his own values, using his own mind. And the only way to do that is if he's free. Rights, to quote Ayn Rand, right is a moral principle, defining and sanctioning a man's freedom of action in a social context. Basically says, and Rand points out that there's only really one right, which is the right to life, the right to take the actions necessary for you to live your life using your mind, free of coercion, free of force, free of authority. So in that sense, rights are moral sanction of a positive. People talk about negative rights, positive rights, which I think confuses it all. It's the idea, to quote Rand, that you are free to act on your own judgment for your own goals by your own voluntary, uncoerced choices. And the role of government, the only role of government, according to Rand, is to protect that freedom, to protect your rights. So notice that Rand doesn't come at government from the perspective of what's good for society, what's good for the public, what's good for the common. She starts with the individual. She starts what's necessary for the individual, for his own survival, for his own thriving, for his own flourishing. She starts with happiness, in a sense, with man's pursuit of happiness, and asks the question, what kind of social structure, what kind of government, what kind of political system do we need to facilitate this pursuit of happiness, to make it possible for individuals to pursue their happiness, not to guarantee happiness, not to guarantee the most happiness for the most people, but to guarantee you the freedom to pursue your happiness. And that is the system of individual rights. That is capitalism. Capitalism, which is a political, social, economic system in which the role of government is limited to the protection of individual rights, primarily property rights, but individual rights broadly, where the government has no involvement in the economy, where there is a true separation of economics from politics. So it's not a question, you know, we've got a million questions right now. What should the Fed do about the, you know, the economy, and should it raise interest rates or lower interest rates? In a true capitalist society, there is no Fed, there is no central planner to make these kind of calls, to make these kind of decisions. The only role of government is to protect you from people trying to steal from you, trying to defraud you. The only role of government is to protect you, to protect your property. So capitalism is not what we have today. I think this is important to know because people are so confused. We don't have capitalism today. What we have today is a mixed economy with some elements of freedom. We're still free in certain realms, in certain parts of our lives, somewhat, ever shrinking amount of freedom. And a lot of government intervention, a lot of what you might call socialism or just statism. The state is involved in regulating almost every aspect of our business lives, many aspects of our personal lives. What we have today and the world out there that is constantly being evaluated is not capitalism. The problems that occur out in the world right now are not problems of capitalism. They can't be, because it's not a capitalist world. It's a statist world. It's not quite a communist world. It's not quite even a fully socialist world. But it is a world dominated by statism, dominated by government intervention, where individual freedom, with the ability of the individual to flourish, with the ability of the individual to make decisions for himself, to think for himself, and to act for himself, are limited and restricted. So if we care about capitalism, which I think a lot of people come to Ayn Rand, not everybody, but a lot of people come to Ayn Rand because they share this idea of political freedom, particularly in the United States. Maybe they admire the founding fathers. Maybe they have a huge respect for American history and the achievement that has been America because of those elements of freedom that have existed in American society. This freedom cannot be sustained. This capitalism cannot, whatever elements of capitalism still remain in America, cannot last under the assault of altruism. And we cannot move towards greater freedom, towards true capitalism, towards a truly free world, without rejecting, completely rejecting the morality of altruism and replacing it with something positive, because it's not enough just to be against something. One has to be for something. And as I said at the beginning, the only moral code consistent with freedom, consistent with capitalism, consistent with the idea that each individual has an inalienable right to pursue the values necessary for his own life using his own mind. The only morality consistent with that is objectivism. It's the idea of rational self-interest, the idea of selfishness, the virtue of selfishness. Freedom depends on our embracing an alternative moral ideal, a moral ideal that is about freedom. It wouldn't be a beautiful thing if people embraced a true moral ideal of freedom and advocated for and fought for and were passionate about their own individual freedom and the social system, capitalism, that makes such freedom possible. All right, so I'm gonna end there. We could go on for quite a bit, but I know there were a lot of questions, so I'm gonna allow us to move into the question period. I don't know, how do we do this, Elan? How do we do the questions?
Hey, Yaron. So Onkar is going to join for this Q&A. We have a spreadsheet we're going to pick from. We have lots of questions. You're right. I'm glad you allowed space for it. Onkar, do you want to pick some out?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that.
Oh, you have the spreadsheet. I don't see it. Okay.
Yeah. So let's take one from the Philly attendees who we had to cancel on. So, and this is, it's about thinking about your life in a society, in a culture. So the question is, how do you adjust your expectations of what's possible to you based on the culture you're in, or changes, the trends in the culture, without becoming a victim to that? Sort of, you're just succumbing to what's happening in the culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and it combines both. I think it's a lot of it is kind of a psychological issue. I think you have to be objective about what is possible. You have to look at the reality as it is, look at facts, and don't let yourself become overwhelmed by the negativity. Look at the opportunities and the positivity. I mean, in spite of how bad things are, and they are bad, one approach you could take is thinking about the fact that you still have more opportunities today than you've had, with a few exceptions here and there over history, in all of human history, 100,000 years. There's been a few moments in history, maybe the late 19th century, maybe parts of the 20th century, where you've had more opportunities than today. But it's still, relatively speaking, amazingly free. Don't let the fact that you know what the potential is cause you to be so depressed that you can't take advantage of the opportunities as they exist today. Now, there are certain professions in which this is much harder than other professions, and that's just a reality that you have to accept, and it's part of approaching career choice objectively. It's part of approaching how you're going to pursue your values objectively. I don't know, if you're an artist, it is probably harder today than it was certainly 100 years ago to pursue your art, because the culture is so corrupt in terms of the art that it likes. If you're an entrepreneur in certain fields, I mentioned life extension. There are lots of other fields. And I'd say here, particularly if you're poor, I think the state has limited your possibilities, your opportunities even more than if if you're starting out in a decent position with decent opportunities. But what choice do you have other than to be as ambitious as you can within the context of what is possible to you, and at the same time fight to increase your freedom? So I'd say those are the two things I would focus on. One, I'm going to find my passion. I'm going to be as ambitious as I will ever do. I know it's going to be harder. I know it's a greater challenge, but what option is there? And make the most of what is available to me. And then at the same time, fight for the kind of world I believe in. I don't think you can do it without the fighting. You need the kind of fight for the world, just for your sanity. You need to be able to express yourself and to project the image of the kind of world you would like to see replace the world we live in. You want to add something, Uncle?
I just say it's easy to think of the culture as monolithic. So you are putting it as different industries, but there's also different countries. Yes. And you have to be willing to move and relocate. So life extension, it's not the same regulations everywhere. So you might have to set up a company and move if that's really what your passion is. I mean, we've left the countries we were born in.
And if people want to understand why Onkar and I, and you probably know this more about me than Onkar, are so passionate about immigration and about having as free as immigration as we can, it's exactly this point. To deny an ambitious young person the ability to move to a place where they can live their life, can actually pursue their values in a world where you can't do it fully anywhere, but to deny them the ability to go from a hellhole to a place with relative freedom, that is such an evil in my view, that, you know, it's what motivates me to be so passionate about immigration. And somebody who did it and didn't move from hellhole, moved from and Onkar did as well, from a pretty good place to an even better place. I only imagine what it's like if you live in a hellhole to suddenly pull up walls to prevent you from moving. So anybody who values the human potential, values the human mind, values the ability of human beings, you've got to be pro-immigration. The details we can get to in mixed economy and all of that, but the essential characteristic of being pro-immigration, I don't think is negotiable.
So we have another one from Philly, but we'll get to it. But I want to bring in another question that's related. It's sort of a different angle on the same thing, but it also relates, maybe not obviously, but it relates to the egalitarian issue. And it's how would Rand's, and this is now quoting the saying, that her pull yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality manifests itself on a large scale?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what it meant by a large scale, but
I think part of it's meant, can everybody do it? Is this only for some people? And then the pull yourself up by your bootstrap, if you take that seriously, it means I did it alone.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So okay. So those are two issues. So one is, can everybody do it? The answer is basically yes. So it's true that certain people are born, let's say with real cognitive problems or real physical problems, maybe can't, and they're dependent on others. But that is a tiny fraction of the population. It is way less than 1%. An overwhelming majority of human beings can take care of themselves, can be ambitious, can live a good life. Not all can become Isaac Newtons. Not everybody can become a Steve Jobs. But in whatever the scope of your ability, you can be the best that you can be. You can exercise your faculty to the maximum. You can be an independent thinker in your life, in the pursuit of your values. So yes, everybody can do it. And the point about a large scale, the other angle of a large scale is what Rand cares about and what Rand is focused on is on individuals, on every individual. And yes, if you add them all up, you get a grand scale. But she doesn't look at it and say, you know, for the public, for society. She looks at it, can an individual determine their own life? Can an individual choose their own values, shape their own values, and pursue them and achieve them? And yes, everybody has that potential, but it requires effort. It requires focus. It requires using your mind. And it's not automatic, which is key, right? It's not, and this is why when you look around, you see, oh, but look, millions of people don't do this. That is true. Millions of people don't do this. Maybe a majority of people don't do it. But you have to ask the question, why? Is it because they're programmed that way? Is it inevitable that they're not? Are they incapable of it? And Rand's answer is unequivocally no. It's not because they're programmed that way. It's not because they're not capable of it. It's because they chose not to do it for whatever reason. It's within their power to choose differently. It's within their power to change, and it's within their power to engage that faculty of reason in pursuit of their own values. So that was the first point. And then the second point is alone. I mean, there's a sense in which it's alone. And that sense is that you have to engage your mind, your reason. Nobody can do that for you. Nobody can turn it on for you. You have to choose to want to think, to value, and to pursue those values. But then from that point is everything that you do alone. It goes back to my desert island thing. Well, of course not. You know, you've got parents, you've got teachers, you've got friends, you've got people who are trading with you with values, a variety of different values. You know, achieving something doesn't mean you achieved every single element of it. You achieve what you achieve. You achieve what you contributed to the creation of whatever it is, right? But in a social context, you benefit enormously from cooperating with other people, trading with other people, and working with other people to achieve your values and whatever values you share with them.
Yeah, and part of the reason I brought it up and put it in that context is this is a common argument today that it's you get the if you say you've achieved something or somebody says I've achieved something, it's well, someone paid for the roads you drove on to work and someone paid for the school where you were an elementary kid and got educated. So what do you mean you did it? And it equivocates between you did everything and what you did was essentially you. Yep. And you made choices and you did something, and in that sense you did it alone. And it's often they'll put it's, well, did you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps? And that means like literally go from zero to you're an adult and you did it all. Nobody taught you how to read or speak and so on. And
of course that was manifest in Obama's famous speech. You didn't build that, you know. Yeah. And
Elizabeth Warren specializes in it.
Yeah, so he got it from Elizabeth Warren. She was even before that. And the idea is you had great teachers, you drove on roads, and all of that is true. You did have great teachers, but that's not what it means to build something. It doesn't mean I did everything. Literally, I went out and went to the quarry and cut up the rock to make the concrete to build the building. I mean, that is absurd. And of course, everyone on call it a supply chain, everybody's talking about supply chains these days, supply chains of the creation of this value. Justice demands that everybody in that supply chain gets compensated according to what they contribute to whatever it is that is being created. So in a sense, every single one of those people built that. They built whatever their portion is in building the thing that is being built, and they all get compensated for it. So it's not like you exploited them. You didn't exploit your teacher. Although I will say, if you had a great teacher, I say this often, if you had a great teacher when you were a kid and you think that, and you justifiably believe that she had a real impact on who you turned out to be and the choices you made, on exposing you to ideas you wouldn't have had, then write them a letter, and if you're rich, send them a check, express your gratitude, and that's an act of justice. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take pride in your own achievements. It's just an expression of justice to thank the people who helped you along the way. There's nothing wrong about that, nothing that diminishes you about other people helping you, to the contrary.
Okay, let's take one more kind of wide issue, and then there's questions, unsurprisingly, about response to the pandemic and so on. So we'll get to that in a second. But the last kind of wider question, which is about thinking, if we had capitalism, full capitalism, or if we're moving in that direction, what would it look like 50, 100 years from now? And in particular, would it look like that there would be a massive concentration of power in a few hands and most people not doing much and sort of useless? And you might even think, I mean, part of the question might be, are we already moving in that direction with the Facebook and Google and so on, having so much power in so few hands, and everybody else is sort of powerless and soon to be useless and not needed?
Yeah, and this is a big issue, and you see it articulated by people on the left, people on the right, libertarians. I mean, really throughout the whole political spectrum, this idea that robots are going to take our jobs, the return for monopolies are going to dominate, and the return for certain types of skills are going to be massive, and the return on all other skills are basically going to be zero. And since robots are taking our jobs, and then you're going to be, in a sense, there's going to be nothing to do. Well, Disney had a movie, a cartoon movie about that, the little robot, and everybody just sits in a chair and eats and drinks all day because they don't have to do anything because the robots are producing everything. And it's so this is not a new idea. And indeed, this idea that technology reduces the amount of jobs and that technology causes a massive concentration of wealth and everybody stays poor and is an old idea. It's an idea that goes back to the 19th century. It's an idea that at least one part of it, the concentration of wealth, gets thoroughly articulated by Karl Marx. And he predicts a certain path for human, where all the wealth is concentrated in a few hands. He basically makes exactly the same prediction that people like Thomas Piketty and others are making today. And of course, the Luddites and the anti-technologists, starting in the late 18th century, were predicting that technology would create these two classes where almost all of us, and the facts, the historical facts, the empirical historical facts suggest the exact opposite. That is, that technology creates more jobs than it destroys, always, everywhere. And just think about the number of people working in productive jobs today. And let's take out a productive subsistence farming, because that's not really productive. So subsistence farming is how most of us lived 300, 400 years ago. We grew food and we ate it. So productive job is where you produce something and you trade, where you're actually creating wealth in a sense. You're trading with others because you're creating what economists call the surplus. We're creating, you're raising your standard of living over time. Technology, the number of people today working in such productive jobs is in the billions. The entire human population 120 years ago was less than a billion. And today number of people working in productive jobs is in the billions. And you get a sense that there's no end to the number of jobs that are going to be out there. And there is no end. Human needs, human wants, human desires are infinite. And unless you're a science fiction writer, and a good one at that, it's hard to imagine what the jobs of the future are going to be. It's hard to imagine what people are actually going to do in the future. I don't know. I mean, I couldn't imagine that literally, I can't remember the number, but it's close to 1 million people, something like that, work today in the gaming industry. And some people get paid to play games online. I mean, that's just bizarre to me, right? Because I'm from a different generation. Most of you think gaming is just, well, it's always been here. It's just, so the kind of industries, the kind of jobs, the kind of work is hard to imagine, but every fact that we know about human nature and about the world out there suggests that technology creates more jobs. And the fact is that technology makes possible productivity for the least able. So somebody who can do math very well, let's say for cognitive reason, not because of, suddenly can use a calculator and then can use a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets are not that hard to use. And they can do very complicated math without really knowing anything about the underlying math because the spreadsheet's doing the work for them. And suddenly they are 1 million times more productive than they were before there was a spreadsheet. So technology actually enhances the productivity of the least able. Enhances the productivity of those who can't program the computer, but can actually use it. Almost everybody can use a computer. So I think it's the exact opposite. And there's no doubt in my mind, and we've got tons of empirical evidence that what capitalism does is it raises the standard of living, quality of life of everybody. Now, some people are going to be super rich. And how super rich are they going to be in capitalism? Yes, they're going to be people who are super rich. How super rich? I don't know. And I don't care. Maybe, Bill Gates would be richer than he is under real capitalism. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he'd have more competition because without regulations, there'd be more competitors and that would drive down his profit margin. Hard to tell. but it doesn't matter. The point is that whatever the outcome is, it's an outcome based on freedom, based on voluntary interaction, based on trade. So capitalism, if we had capitalism 100 years from now, I don't know what it looks like in that kind of detail. What I can tell you is that everybody who's living under that system 100 years from now is thousands of times better off than they are today in every dimension of their lives. That some people are dramatically wealthier than others is absolutely true. But if they've lived under capitalism for 100 years, nobody cares. But everybody in that society, except those who refuse to use their minds, everybody in that society is better off. The people who refuse to use their minds, what I always refer to as the wife-beating drunk, is probably worse off. But then why do we care? You certainly shouldn't care about structuring a society around the wife-beating drunk's well-being. We should focus it on the well-being of those who are willing to use their minds. And they are thousands of times better off than we are today.
Okay, let's try to take two questions about the current situation. And I'm condensing, but there have been a few more than two questions. So condense them into two. So one about thinking about markets and one about government. So on the markets, people are going into stores and there's nothing on the shelves, particularly like hand sanitizer, paper towel, toilet paper. Do you think it would be worse or better if we were closer to a free market? That's one. And then in terms of government, thinking of a proper government, what should its powers be in the case of a pandemic like this?
So if I'm allowed to plug my show, my plan is to do a whole show tomorrow on what pandemics look like under capitalism. So, because I think there's a lot to say about that. So, but broadly here, I would say to the second question first, is that the role of government is the same in a pandemic as it is in everything else. The role of government is the protection of individual rights. And there is a role here because if I have a virus or a disease that clearly is life-threatening or represent a significant health threat towards other people, then the government's job is to prevent me from infecting those other people. So I'll give you an example. It just infuriates me because everybody's so blasé about it. There was a guy the other day who flew on a JetBlue plane. And as he got off the plane, I guess he told the flight attendant, hey, I've got coronavirus. Now, in a proper world, that guy would be in jail in 5 minutes, right? He would be quarantined, but more than that, he would be, I think, under criminal prosecution for endangering other people. And potentially, if other people got the disease, liable for the cost of treating them. And if anybody died, liable for manslaughter. So a proper government would take those kind of things super seriously, right? It would once somebody is identified with having the disease, it would insist on them being isolated and quarantined. And of course, because borders do matter, one of the things that it would be doing is in assessing people entry into the country, one of the qualifications would be, are you carrying an infectious disease? And it's completely legitimate for a country to be checking people as they enter the country of whether they're carrying an infectious disease, and if they are, either quarantine them or send them back where they came from. So that's part of what a government would do. So in a true laissez-faire capitalist economy, I think that is really all it would do, including all that's necessary to make that possible, which is not trivial. Now, I think in the world in which we live in today, which is not ideal, and where the government is involved in so much of our lives already, it can't only do that. When 50, 60% of the healthcare system is controlled by the government, it can't say, well, we're going to let the market deal with that. We're not going to be involved. It has to be much more engaged in the world today than it would be under a purely capitalist system. And that would include things that haven't been done, well, today, facilitating the testing, making sure there are enough beds, hospital beds, making sure there are enough hospital supplies and all of that. And let me just say about the supermarkets, things would be better, much better in a free market for a variety of reasons, because I think if we were in a free market, people would be more rational. I think the way the government has dealt with this has encouraged this kind of behavior. I think that businessmen would have been had more expectation. Price gouging would have kicked in, which would have moderated people hoarding stuff. So there were a lot of mechanisms that in a free market would have dealt with this. And of course, people could have immediately asked people to go, paid people to go in overtime. You can't do that. There are all kind of labor laws. There's so many ways in which production is restricted today. And you can't, as an emergency situation, just ramp up production as a one-time thing. That in a totally free market, there would be a lot fewer shortages than there are today.
I want to just chime in, Yaron. Let's take a 3-minute break and resume at the top of the hour. I want to give people a chance to stretch their legs. And
Onkar wants to add anything to this particular question.
Well, I was going to say, let's continue talking about this, because I know there are other questions about this in relation to immigration and so on. So why don't we just take a quick break, and we'll be back at the top of the hour for the general Q&A. Thanks, Yaron.
Thanks.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us at AynRandCon Live. I'm going to be joined in just a moment by my colleagues Yaron, Brook, and Onkar, Ghate, and we're now going to try to make a dent in the long list of questions that we have in this general Q&A panel. We are going to try as best we can to give some priority to the questions from people who had registered for the Philadelphia event, which we canceled and brought it online to this one. Also, for those of you who are watching on Zoom, I've launched a poll. We'd love you to give us your response to that about whether you're a student or not. And if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, I think that's everything. We're offering, we're asking you to answer the same poll, but through a different medium. So let's turn to the question period. We have a lot of questions, and I cut you off, Yaron, about you wanted to add a few thoughts, or you were talking about.
I wanted to add anything to the previous question.
Okay, let's go. Let's do that.
The rule.
Yeah, I would say on the first aspect of it about government power, I think one of the things. So I agree for sure that when you're dealing with infectious disease, and here it's easily transmittable, that there's a role for government to protect people's rights, and so to quarantine, isolate, and so. But I do think one has to also think about this issue and not downplay its importance, which is how the government's going to do it, and particularly how the decision-making works to wield this power. So part of the separation of powers is to create a system of government where the government's checking itself. And the less there is of that, or the more it's decayed, the more any kind of power, even legitimate power, it's wielded. It can be wielded in all kinds of bad ways, and there's no check. So this is like for the war power. Government should have the power of war. But if Congress completely cedes to the executive branch, you decide we were supposed to declare war, but now that never happens. It's all the powers in the executive branch. It can be easily abused. And the same to declare a pandemic. I think Congress should have a role in it, and they should be checking each other, and disputes the Supreme Court would resolve, so that like you can't have a pandemic that's going to, likely last 2 years, and they're wielding this power. And you saw after 9/11 again, seizing emergency powers that they never give up. And you have to really be sensitive to, that happens, that they take power and never give it up. And what are the checks and balances to make that this power will be wielded objectively, not non-objectively?
I just one quick thought about that. So that you mentioned the idea of wielding power, or so seizing power and then not giving it up. I mean, that's an established pattern. And one of the things I think is really concerning now is that this is the mechanism by which government grows in significant ways. When people are really afraid and they see government as sort of the savior, and it's it happens in wartime, but now I think there's really cause for concern because of people's attitude towards government. So the kind of culture that we have and the attitudes people have towards government, which is tell us what to do. Should we wash our hands? Should we not wash our hands? And it's as if you aren't a responsible adult. So it's heightened, I think, by the context of this situation where there's limited knowledge. There isn't really acknowledgement of what is going on.
Notice the lack of outrage for the massive, violation of individual rights that's going on right now. The state of California is just taking hotels and motels, right? To hell with private property. We're going to use this to quarantine people, and you'd think this would be anti the Constitution, but or we're going to just cancel events, right? We're just going to tell you have to cancel events. Why can't I decide to cancel events, or the attendees decide not to come to my event? So, okay, no, the government has to decide no more events beyond a certain. All of these things are massive violation of rights, confiscation of private property, and nobody is outraged because it's in the name of emergency. And notice all these governors, they'll have one case and they're announcing emergency powers in almost every state in the union. And what are emergency powers? They're the power now to violate rights on a scale that normally they couldn't, and then nobody will question, and nobody is questioning. Look at what's happening in Italy, which is truly, stunning. What they've managed to do in Italy, and compare it, for example, to a more rational government, whether by accident or planned, which is the South Korean response, which has been much more rational and much less rights violating, and they're in much better situation. The moral is the practical, much better situation than Italy or the United States or any of these other countries. So Elan, any next question?
Yeah, so shall we to switch a little to what a directly moral issue. So this is from Daniel watching on Zoom, Philadelphia attendee. Appreciate you coming to the online version. So I'll read this question. You guys take a stab at it. How does one integrate one's history of immorality in the past to one's current state of self-esteem, i.e. Dealing with guilt? And then there's a related question. How should we relate to others' past immorality in judging their current character? And there's a third part, but why don't we take those two elements and I'll see if we can fit in the follow-up.
I'll take so one distinction that one has to make at the outset, I think, is this. There's such a thing as earned guilt and such a thing as unearned guilt. And it's particularly relevant when one's thinking about morality and what we were talking about for the last 3 hours. If it's true that the conventional morality is wrong, then it's going to make you feel guilty for all kinds of things that you should not feel guilty for. So if it's telling you pursuing your own life and happiness and career and being concerned with your loved ones and not with your enemies, if that's evil, then if you're doing that, you should feel guilty for it. And if you're now starting to question that moral view, you can think about your past, like I felt guilty a lot. And you have to think, yeah, but maybe for most of it, I shouldn't have felt guilty. And so it's relevant. I think you should think about your history, and because it's what forms your character. So you should think of what's forming my character. But you have to be open to the possibility, particularly if you're changing your moral views, to think, okay, I've been evaluating myself as guilty for that, but I should think of that as something good about myself. And much of Atlas Shrugged, the story, revolves around this, of people condemning themselves for what, in fact, on a better morality, or let's put it just on what Ayn Rand thinks of as a better morality, they should think of themselves as not just not guilty, but good for what I've done. So a lot of the business people beat themselves up for their virtues. So that's one thing that is very important. And then on the second, if you now still think there's things in your past, it's that I were wrong and I made bad choices and I should not have done that. You only live in the present and extending into the future. There's nothing you can do about the past, but in the present, you can make amends, for instance, of the people you think that you wronged or that you hurt, or if it's just directed towards yourself, that I was lazy and I didn't put a lot of effort in and I never tried to build a career. So you haven't really hurt anybody else, you've hurt yourself. It's, what am I doing now? And to the extent it might be hard, but am I trying to get into a better path, to get a job that I like and not resent, and try to have more constructive relationships at work instead of trying to sabotage myself and everybody else? You have to evaluate yourself and what am I doing in the present? But that includes, am I making corrections and amending things I've done wrong in the past? And to the extent you can, I think you should try to do it.
Yeah, and I think that same methodology applies to judging other people, although you know less about them, you know less about the processes in their own mind. But if somebody has done bad stuff in the past that is objectively bad, that is truly bad, then have they recognized that? Have they apologized for it? Have they done anything to compensate if there was damages? And are they on a proper path? So people can redeem themselves. Not everything is redeemable, but most things are redeemable. They can redeem themselves, but that requires them to initiate it and to actually engage in activities that shows that it's genuine and that they won't do it again. Because to the extent, let's say they did it to you, it is dangerous for you to deal with somebody who does harm to you unless you are now convinced that they won't do that harm again to you. Again, be selfish. So you have to have enough evidence that they are on the right path, that they understood their mistakes and they are committed to not doing them again, or in order to be willing to re-engage with them or to forgive them.
Yeah, and I think that actually covers the third element, which I didn't raise, but so that was the issue of forgiveness. So there's a place for it, but there are certain conditions that have to be met.
Elan, can we take one question that came up in yours that I think it would be good to address, which was, what's the difference between self-interest and rational self-interest? you can start on that, Elan, if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a quick response to that. I mean, the broad category in philosophy is, I mean, it's an answer to the question of who is the beneficiary of your action. And the egoism or self-interest means you are the beneficiary of your actions. But that doesn't tell you how you achieve values. It doesn't tell you how to identify them. And it doesn't really give you what Ayn Rand's theory gives you. So the addition of saying it's rational self-interest, it's identifying that there's a kind of a principle that you need to follow to identify your interests and figure out how to be the beneficiary of your actions. What are actually things in your interest? What will benefit you? And this is in contrast with, I mean, there are other theories of egoism, and the other theories, some of them will say you have to, find things that make you feel good, and that's what it means to be egoist. And then there are still other theories that say, well, it's automatic. We're all essentially, through our psychology, we're all basically egoistic. So the contrast is, the way I understand it is, adding the modifier rational is to point out that it's a matter of choice and that you need to think about how to accomplish your interests. So I hope that's a good start I hope you agree with that. If you want to add anything to this? Okay, so I wanted to flag a quick question. This came up it's in response to your talk, Onkar, and I think it's worth just 2 parts to it. Number one, you referenced a book in your presentation that has a foreword by Bill Gates. So what is the title and who's the author, just so people who are interested could look up that resource?
The author's Peter Singer, who's a professor of philosophy, and it's it's Famine, Affluence, and Morality, I think.
Yeah.
But it might be Affluence, Famine, and Morality. But if you search Peter Singer and Famine, you'll find it on Amazon.
Okay, and then part 2, this I think has general interest. Which of Rand's essays would you recommend to get the most in-depth reflection of her moral thinking?
Well, to get the in-depth, it's the lead essay in The Virtue of Selfishness. So that's her nonfiction book that's essays on morality. And the lead essay is The Objectivist Ethics. And there she presents the structure of her ethics and its basic principles and the argument for them. But it's a difficult essay. So because what she's doing is presenting her system of ethics, how to think about it, what's radically new and different in it. It's there that she's making the connection that the whole, why do we need a morality? Where do values come from? So it's dealing with the fundamental foundational issues. If you want to get your toe wet, there's other things to read. So there's other essays in that book that on particular issues about, for instance, about moral judgment. And she calls it, one of the essays, the cult of moral grayness, that people say there's no such thing as black and white, there's only shades of gray, and she doesn't think that is true. So there's a lot of things you can get to get your toes wet. One of them is, I think it's in The Voice of Reason, the essay, who is the final authority in ethics? And this deals, now again, in a pretty sophisticated way, but it deals with the common question, well, if there's no God, who decides what's right and wrong? Where does morality come from? And she thinks that the whole question is completely wrong. And that is a lead. You'll start to get some of her view. But if you want really the in-depth one and want to read one thing, it's The Objectivist Ethics.
Yeah, and I will just say quickly, for those of you who are interested in getting that, obviously you can find it in The Virtue of Selfishness, which you can buy everywhere books are sold. But on our website, on AynRand.org, you can find both The Objectivist Ethics and Who is the Final Authority in Ethics, which is a related one. And I think as well, The Cult of Moral Grayness. Pretty sure that's online too. Okay, so let's turn to some more questions. Okay, how about this one from Stephanie on Zoom? if this morality of self-sacrifice that we've been talking about today is considered quote unquote unquestionable, how do you suggest the question be raised so that it doesn't get shut down? In other words, so that the rational approach can be communicated?
Yeah.
I can say a few things and then someone else can say some more. So I would say two things. One is to ask the question that Ayn Rand says you should ask, which is, why is that the good? By what standard and where do you get this standard? So if it is, it's about sacrifice and giving up. Like, why? Why is that what morality is about? Who decided that? Who determines that? What's the argument for it? And you will get responses to that. And so the second part of my answer is, there's no easy way to this. It's the most difficult issue for somebody to question, because you don't meet someone, leave aside a very young child, who doesn't have moral views. Part of the moral views is what I put in my presentation, that you can't think about moral questions. It's about your feelings, your emotions. So when you say, like, why and what's the argument, the pushback will be, you don't need an argument. Don't you feel this? And if you say no, or if you even just say, I'm starting to question this, I'm starting to wonder about it, the response is, that's evil. And from a certain perspective, it is evil. From the conventional moralities, you're not supposed to question this. You're not supposed to have doubts. It's the same when you're doubting religion. It's one of the main things that comes is, you're not supposed to ask questions. Stop asking. This is a common thing for young kids when they start asking questions. Stop already. Stop thinking about it. You're supposed to believe. You're supposed to accept. Don't you feel it? And then if you're asked, well, no, I don't. There's something wrong with you. So to have the intellectual and moral courage to question this, you have to stand outside of it. But to stand outside of the good is to be evil. And you will be, and I mean, you can take Ayn Rand as a lightning. Why is she a lightning rod of so much criticism? Because she's saying, look, what everybody thinks is good is evil. And the response is, that's evil, what you're saying. If you're questioning what's good, you have to be on the side of evil. And that, there's no getting around that. So there's things you can do to try to encourage people to ask questions. But you have to be sensitive to the fact that the culture for in a sense, logical reasons, pushes the person to think, no, I should not be asking questions. That's evil.
All right, let me throw another question at you guys. This is from someone who is anonymous on Zoom. Doesn't duty make people follow rules and therefore maintain the social structure? So in effect, a challenge to some of the views raised.
Why is maintaining the social structure a value? I mean, what social structure? You know, the communists followed rules, and there was a social structure in communism that entailed tens of millions of people dying. It was a structure. It's like people who say, oh, we shouldn't do that because it'll increase instability. Well, who said stability is a value? What does stability mean? In what context? Where is stability in the Middle East a value? Is stability in the Midwest a value? I mean, these are all thrown out there as if we should all accept them as that structure is important. Some structures are awful. The structure of the Catholic Church, the structure of communism, the structure of fascism, and I would argue the structure of a mixed economy. And beyond that, what is, even if you could argue that somehow everybody playing their little bits, you know, reduces violence and our lives is somehow marginally better, which you can't, but let's say, well, what about their lives? You know, what about the people who are following duty? Their lives are not better. Their lives are miserable. And they now, you're basically treating them as cogs in a machine. We want this social stability. So we're treating you like a little cog, and you have to follow these duties so that the machine can function. It's a completely collectivistic, anti-individualistic view of the world. And it places a value in something that in and of itself, independent of what the structure actually is is not a value, is actually can very well be an anti-value, which is stability or structure.
Okay, I've got another question for you. We've talked quite a lot about altruism, and Luke on YouTube is asking what I think is I think it's a tough question. So, can you explain why, if altruism is bad, why did it last as a philosophy for so long? And you could even amplify that, I would say, by saying, and its hold on people is so strong. And how does that work?
I mean, I'll say, so part of it, the previous, or I guess it's 2 questions ago now, is relevant. How hard it is to question this is really relevant for how it endures. But it's if you know about the history of the West, Christianity had to stamp out the ancient world, and particularly stamp it out or take it over intellectually. So it's not true that throughout the whole history of the West, it's been saturated with altruism. And particularly the ancient Greek period, which is the period of the most astonishing intellectual and cultural progress. If you see from where the Greeks started, about 7th, 8th century BC to where they end up in a few hundred years, it's unbelievable if you know anything about that. And if you read about the culture and read some primary things, sources about it, whether it's go to some of the plays, this is not a culture that is saturated in altruism. And indeed, I think much of what Christianity teaches, if you told an ancient Greek, love your enemy, he would think you're crazy. I mean, he would think you're crazy. And should be checked into a mental institution. So it comes to dominate, but it comes to dominate because the supernatural view of the world comes to dominate. And then it's you're subordinate to a whole other realm and a whole other power. And when that wanes, altruism wanes. So it's true that in terms of explicit doctrines, this is what's preached in morality. But in the wider culture, there are forces that push against it. And it's the result from the Renaissance onward. But what the Renaissance was rediscovering the ancient world and finding, oh no, Christianity is not the only way to look at the world. And the rediscovery of reason gave people self-confidence to think for themselves and to value their own minds in a certain way. And once you start to get that, people take altruism less seriously. And it was on its way out. So the fact I brought up in my talk, Mill and Kant, and I said they're 19th century, they're resurrecting altruism, but they're resurrecting it because it's being pushed out. And Kant's explicit about this. I'm here to save religion, and particularly the religious ethics, because it's going to lose. And unfortunately, he saves it. But that's a complicated philosophical issue of why nobody could answer Kant. And so everybody thought, yeah, he's shown that reason has nothing to do with morality, and morality is about commandments from some beyond. We don't know what beyond. It's called the noumenal world, but it's like we don't know what it is, but I guess that's where it comes from. And so, but it was saved. So it was on its way out. So it's not just, it's always there, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, and that the alternative is such an achievement, right? That's coming up with a moral code that is consistent with human nature, that actually can answer the challenges of Kant and the other philosophers, and can complete what started in the Enlightenment, is not easy, and it's really a massive achievement. And this is part of the genius of Ayn Rand, is that there weren't other philosophers who did this. Maybe there's some who tried at the edges, but nobody actually could create a system that actually presented an alternative to altruism, an alternative that people could actually live, and an alternative that didn't involve sacrificing others to self, for example, but that actually took self-interest seriously from a philosophical perspective and from the perspective of human life. So I think it's that combination of the difficulty in giving up religion and the ability of philosophers kind of to secularize these ideas, and then just a monumental achievement that is objectivism, and the difficulty in having somebody come up with that monumental achievement. Now it's up to us to put it into place, to saturate the culture with an alternative to altruism.
All right, I have a number of questions still I'd love to get through. So let me try to, I know it's always hard, but let's try to give slightly shorter answers so we have more time. I know you always bristle at that, Yaron. That's okay. Okay, question from Ayan on Facebook. I'm just going to summarize a portion of it, but aren't certain key things like food, shelter, security, a sense of belonging prerequisites for self-esteem? And if you're lacking in some of these, imagine someone who's desperately poor and fundamental resources, how can you actually achieve self-esteem? So isn't there like a precondition of that is relevant here?
No, so all of those things have to be produced. None of those things is just a given. None of those things is supplied by reality for us. And it's indeed the achievement of those things that is what leads to self-esteem. And this is true of a poor kid and a rich kid. It doesn't matter. That is, let's say you're born rich, and yeah, it's all around you. But if you don't actually engage your mind and create something and gain the certainty that you could build it even if your parent didn't give it to you, you could produce the wealth even if you didn't inherit it, you are going to produce wealth for yourself, then you're not going to have the self-esteem. And of course, a poor kid who doesn't have it, by creating, by building, by educating himself, by getting a job, by making a living, by putting food on the table, they are gaining the self-esteem. So it's true for every human being that they must experience the idea that they are competent to put the food on the table and to put a roof above their head in order for them to gain the self-esteem. It's a prerequisite for everybody, no matter what your starting point is.
Okay, let me, I'm going to put together two questions. One is from Gerardo on Zoom, and the other one is from Fabian on, sorry, not Fabian. The other one is from, let me find it. Sorry, Gerardo, and I'm sorry, I can't find the person's name, but oh, sorry, Alec, both from Zoom. So the two questions are basically, I think in response to our presentations, why are we in this conference equating religion with irrationality? And then sort of the related question from another person is, of all the religions out there, aren't there some that are more sort of self-oriented, more rational, more life-oriented? So do you guys want to take those two parts?
So the second, I think there are interpretations of religion that can be more or less hostile to human life. I mean, that's just Christianity. There's so many sects, and within the sects, you have to, like, how do they actually interpret, and what do they take seriously of this, and what don't they? But I think it's, when you're talking about in a modern period, all of this, it's because of outside forces. So the reason Christianity does not look the way it looked in the Middle Ages is you had the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, and you have the rediscovery of all the ancient learning, and then you have it going beyond that, the discovery, modern science, Galileo, Newton, and so on. And it's, yeah, well, our text told us the world's created in 7 days and the earth's at the, are we going to stick to this? And the Enlightenment's pushing, no, be rational. And some people try to make a kind of truce. Okay, yeah, we'll be rational about this kind of stuff, but let us still believe that if I eat this cookie, that's the body of Christ and so on. And then it's well, that's stupid, so we won't. And it's so they can start to look like it gets better, but it's not getting better qua religion. It's getting better because outside forces are neutralizing it. Really, I think that's what happened. Now, that when you go into like the early origins of religion, it's different because they don't know any better. But that's not the modern context where you have so much rational secular knowledge.
And why do we create religion with irrationality? Because religion is based on the negation of rationality in some scope of life. You know, different religions, different periods of time, just as Onkar said. You know, that scope of life might be everything. So follow the book, even if the book says the sun goes around the earth, right, up to, you know, the Catholic Church through Galileo, to today, where follow the book only in these things, right? The things that we decided you should follow the book. But in whatever it is, it's the negation of reality, negation of evidence, the negation of your senses, negation of thought. Whatever it is requiring faith, which is the opposite of reason. It's requiring you to submit to authority over your own thinking mind in whatever scope your particular religion applies it to. But religion, core religion, is always anti-reason and anti-reality, anti-fact.
Well, we've basically run out of time. We have a lot of questions. What we could do is we're definitely going to save these questions. We're going to use them to stimulate other events, and we'll definitely we always read these, and they often lead to episodes in our web series, Philosophy for Living on Earth. I want to just take a pause here and say a few words to wrap up today. Thank you, Onkar and Yaron, for the Q&A session and for your presentations. I want to tell people a bit about what we've been doing here today. And, you know, if you've been with us since earlier today, thank you. And if you've just joined us, thank you as well. It's really fun for us to be talking about these ideas, and we enjoy it. And our goal is to create these events so that you can learn more about Ayn Rand's ideas. Our goal is to stimulate you, to inspire you, to motivate you. And, you know, we were going to do this in person in Philadelphia, but we didn't do that. But I'm delighted that so many of you were able to join us online. We've had people from literally every corner of the globe, and that's thanks to the genius of technology. And I want to thank you for taking the time to spend with us. At various points during the day, more than 400 people were here for this conference online. As we draw a line here, I just want to take a moment to suggest that, you know, if you found these ideas interesting and stimulating, and if you want to deepen your understanding and really explore further, which I hope is what you will, I want to share with you 3 things that you can do next. You can do them immediately we end this conference. You can do them right away, and they are all, I think, going to be enriching of your life. So the first one is something that I hope you will consider doing. If you have a smartphone, you can download right now the Ayn Rand University app. This contains literally hundreds of hours of talks and conferences, so lectures from conferences and in-depth courses by experts on Ayn Rand's ideas, including lectures by Ayn Rand herself. This is material that in the past used to cost hundreds of dollars to buy on CD, but, you know, thanks to technology, we've put it on the web. We put it through, you can get it on an app, iPhone or Android, and it's completely free to you. You can download it right away. I hope you will do that right after this call if you don't already have it on your phone. And it's a really powerful tool for enhancing your understanding of Rand's ideas. You can listen to things offline while you're driving to work, while you're at the gym, whenever you have time to do that. Number 2, I want to tell you about the largest in-person gathering of Ayn Rand fans in the world. It's called OCON, or the Objectivist Summer Conference. The next one is scheduled for June in Austin, Texas. And at this time, I know a lot of things might change. We still expect the event to go ahead. And we really want to encourage you to join us. It's a thrilling event. Last year, we had more than 500 people. It is just a really powerful experience for connecting with people, learning, being inspired. And to encourage you, we've extended the registration discount. You can get, I think, 25% off the registration from today through April 15th, which is for many people not a pleasant day, but we're hoping that you'll take the plunge and join us in Austin, Texas. We're going to have a really full program of talks. The theme of that event is living a life of purpose. And what does that look like from the philosophy of Ayn Rand? All right, final thought, things you can do next. I hope you'll consider this. So this event, we were able to host online, and this is sort of integral to what we do at the Ayn Rand Institute. We're an educational organization. Our mission is to foster growing awareness, understanding, and acceptance of Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. That's what we do. We wake up every morning, we think of new ways to do it. We reach out to high school students through essay contests, and we give them Ayn Rand's books to read in their classrooms and study. We publish articles and books and videos and courses, and we host events like this one. We host events in person all over the country. Last month, we were in Warsaw, Poland. We're going to be in different parts of the country throughout the year as things permit. And we're able to do all of this. We're able to reach new people and bring them some awareness and deeper understanding of Ayn Rand's ideas only because of the donors to the Ayn Rand Institute. Ayn Rand Institute members are the foundation of everything we do. This event would not have been possible without them. I know some of you watching today are supporters of the Ayn Rand Institute, and I want to just take a moment to thank you. We appreciate your commitment and support. And for those of you who are new or are not already members, I want to encourage you, when we hang up, to go to AynRand.org/membership and consider becoming a monthly member. It starts at $10 a month, and it's $10 a month. What do you usually spend $10 a month on? And think about what the benefits are. So $15 a month gets you Netflix. I think a lot of you have it. If you get a latte at Starbucks once or twice a week, that's $30 a month. And if you go to the gym, or if you have a gym membership but don't go, which is usually many people's scenario, unfortunately, that's $150+ a month. Whatever you can give, we would appreciate it. You can become a member from $10 a month. And what that does is enables the Ayn Rand Institute to grow, to reach new people, to bring these life-changing ideas, ideas that drive human progress and prosperity and unlock for people the path to individual happiness. That's what we are trying to do. And that's a lot. I think that's worth a lot. I hope you'll become a part of our cause by giving money to support what we do. And if you've enjoyed just today's event, if you thought today's event was worth your while, and I hope you did, please consider giving us your financial support. It starts at $10 a month, and your monthly support means a lot to us. And with that, I want to just thank you for spending your Saturday afternoon, or whatever time of day it is for you, wherever you are. And I hope you'll go forth and learn more about Ayn Rand's ideas, because I think there's a lot of value in it for you. And thank you. We'll see you next time.